just trying to, unfortunately, Jen is trying to figure out with the ABCC exactly what kind of one-day license they need. They're doing this kind of fundraiser with, what's the place in Untoward? What's the place in Situate?
Untold Brewery.
And I had a really good conversation with Lance Sonchik.
Of course you did, because he's pretty awesome.
Let me see if David, I get David Bigley right up here.
Okay.
You know? Hey, you quiet? Quiet. Mr. Bigley, you're up.
Okay, first thing we have on the agenda is public comment for items not on the agenda. Is there any member of the public that would like to speak on a matter not on the agenda?
Don't trip anybody.
Hearing none. The next order of business is discussion of a position, an open position on the Cable Advisory Committee. We have an applicant, David Bigley, who is sitting right down. We'll give you a moment.
Who's David Bigley?
Have you seen him around then? So, David, welcome.
Thank you.
If you don't mind introducing yourself and your address for the record.
Sure. David Bigley, 25 James Lane.
And you have applied for a position on the Cable Advisory Committee.
Yes.
Give us a little bit of your background, and thank you, first of all, for stepping up.
Yeah. And I'm actually still interested after thinking about it. I have had actually a long history with public access from decades ago in Somerville, and was part of a group that managed to get a very strong commitment from Warner Cable, then was the provider there, for a public access, for them to actually build a studio in Somerville. And I did a show there for a while. I produced, I was the host of a show. I produced several shows. I think that public access is an element of the cable wiring or whatever, or community that's the most exciting to me, is that people can actually produce shows. And so I thought I'd try to just dust off those old skills and start it again.
Well, welcome, we need new members, and I was at an event with David, and he mentioned having submitted this thing, and I'm like, okay, it's on the agenda as soon as possible. And have you met Don Royne?
Oh, yes.
Yep,
Yeah.
and Nicole in the back,
I have
from the
not met
committee.
Nicole.
That's Nicole, this is David.
Hey, David. Yeah, I
Do the
definitely
selectmen have any questions?
definitely know Don.
How quickly can you start? You don't
Is
see
there a
any.
meeting tomorrow? or-
You don't see any conflict in this role, in your annual role as Santa Claus?
Oh, the
Gee,
kids have
what
to
are you
walk
Nice way to blow that one.
Oh, those of you at home,
No.
ignore that guy on the left for the time being. Great, well, our process is,
Sorry.
we will take a vote tonight, on appointment, and then you'll get, the clerk reminded me to remind our applicants of this. You'll get paperwork in the mail,
Yeah.
that, or your nomination, official nomination papers, you'll have to come to town hall, sign a few things, get sworn in, and then as soon as that happens, you're an
There
official
was-
member of the
I saw
committee.
something there about an ethics training.
There is ethics training that's required of everybody serving on a committee, and Carol in the clerk's office will give you all that information. You can certainly, as a member of the public, go to every meeting that they have. If they have a meeting tomorrow, you're certainly welcome to go there, you just wouldn't officially count as a quorum. And that is presuming we have a motion and a second.
Just before we go to the motion, where does this leave cable advisory? Is it?
Nicole's coming back up, the chair, and I would defer to her unless you wanna say now. Are there still members needed on Cable Advisory
Yes,
Committee?
you could still take a few more members down.
Yeah.
We currently have 3.
Okay,
There'll be
Supposed to
5.
have no less than 5 and something.
yeah.
Three prior to your application, David?
Right,
Is that right?
yes.
Okay.
Yep.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there a motion?
Yeah, I move that we accept David Bigley's as a new appointment to the Cable Advisory.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right, congratulations.
Thank you, David.
And thank you.
There you go.
Okay. Okay. Hang on one second, the next up is, a change of manager for Mr. Dooley's. I just gotta get the hearing notice in front of me, apologize. Arlene and Sean, you can make your way to the podium. Are you okay with dogs?
Yeah.
He's our assistant town manager.
No problem. Yeah, he's a roadblock right now. What are we doing, big guy?
Yeah, he'll move along.
Come on, sweetie,
Just
come
give him a little push.
Come.
Okay. Welcome, if you don't mind, let me just, sorry. So we're here to, hear from representatives from Mr. Dooley's, for a change of manager. Arlene McDade is the applicant, and I'm gonna ask you both to introduce yourself, and then maybe Sean kind of walk us through, presentation of Arlene, and then the board will ask some questions.
My name is Sean Summers. I represent the Summers Pubs, and Mr. Dooley's. I am part of the Summers family. Myself and my sisters run the Summers Pubs. This is Arlene McDade. She's going on as the manager on record and onto the license. Arlene and I have actually worked together for close to 20 years, which is pretty unique in this industry to still have the same, the same employees. And would you like Arlene to introduce
Yeah,
herself
I'd love
as
Arlene
well?
to introduce herself and, just tell us a little bit about your experience at Mr. Dooley's.
My name's Arlene McDade. I started in Mr. Dooley's when it first opened in 2012, I believe. And I've been there ever since, but previously I was in the Green Dragon of Boston with Sean and everybody.
Another Summers Pub.
Yes, another summer pub. Since Mr. Dooley's has opened, I was one of the managers at the very beginning. And a couple of kids kind of stepped back from the management position, and I'm ready to step back up and do it again.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any questions from the board?
You've had the management position, did you say before,
Before, correct.
at the Green Dragon in Boston?
Green Dragon in Boston, and when we first opened up Mr. Dooley's.
Have you held up a liquor license before? Have you done your name as manager?
Not on the liquor
License
license,
before.
no.
And have you read the regulations that we
I have.
have? Okay.
Paul, any questions?
Should it come to to the need, would you be able to stop serving if there's a problem with the bar?
Oh, definitely.
One of the other things comes up is if you're open late, closed late, and there's employees that are still in the bar, there's regulations that request that you notify the police that there are still employees on the premises, so that they're aware if someone is, cashing out late, things like that.
Okay.
So that they're aware, more from a safety point of view, so I agree with that.
Jack?
I'm good, thank you.
Steve?
No, I've read the background materials and so on, I really don't have any questions, so.
And at the risk of exposing something about myself, I've been a regular customer at Mr. Dooley's, and Arlene has been there since day one, and that's one of the nice things about that business is that, it's a lot of the same faces, and I think that's really important, especially in a small town, so welcome, I'm very happy for you, and if somebody would like to make a motion,
Move that we, did you actually appoint? Is it appointment of the
Yes.
liquor license
the
manager?
change of manager approved.
Approve, thank you. Move that we approve, change of manager at, Mr. Dooley's DBA, Summers Pubs DBA, Mr. Dooley's, to Arlene McDade.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That's it.
Good.
Great. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Thank you both.
I'm looking
And-
forward to really, sorry, I didn't mean to stop you, go ahead,
No, go ahead.
to this weekend with the race.
Likewise, I have it on. I was gonna say
Linda
the same
Fletcher,
thing.
Linda
Yeah, Linda
and
Factor.
myself have been communicating a lot over,
Yeah.
the race and just getting more involved with myself, I'm gonna be going to the Rotary Club, and I'd like,
Great.
just getting involved in the community and having the club as a backdrop and,
Good.
just having, just being part of it, and I think Arlene will be a great asset, and I've been down here a lot more, and
Yeah.
it's just something that I'm looking for, so I'm excited for this race, we're sponsoring it, we're doing like dollar tacos and, Cohasset Road Race Brew, we're gonna have on, and so it's just fun for, to see all these things coming together, so.
Yeah, that's how the town runs.
That's exactly right. That's particularly important for our town. That's what we really like to see with our businesses, to be a part of the community like that, so I'm very glad to hear that.
And later in the agenda, I'm gonna talk about the road race, which is this Sunday, and thank you for
Yeah.
stepping up, and
Yeah.
it's gonna be an exciting day,
Yes,
so
yeah,
we'll see you
looking
then.
forward to it.
By the
Thanks,
way,
Arlene.
I think it may have been one of the best days you ever had was the year that it rained on the road race. There was about half the field that never left.
You mean I have to run?
Well, I think it's actually supposed to be like a decent day this year. so-
Well, then you'll get him afterwards for sure.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah.
Alright, get some sleep.
Cohasset Road Race Brew, you're gonna try one.
Have a great day.
Alright, thank you very
Yeah.
much.
Thank you.
Okay, next up, we're gonna have, a permit for Earth Day, April 27th. Peter, come on up. Welcome, and again, thank you for
Peter
doing this.
Pescatore, 12 Lantern Lane, also on the Open Space Committee, which is de facto the Earth Committee as well.
For the whole run?
And why not?
I have a couple of slides queued up. I want to
Oh, great.
put that up.
If they work, we like visuals. We don't.
So
Here's
it's $5
a set of hard copies, pass around. Looks like hard copies, if you like.
So Peter, just ask you to speak up, just so that people at home hear you, because this is all important.
Tracy, the other one first, please. Yeah. Okay, as you may or may not know, the town used to celebrate Earth Day annually, and it was, run by the, Cohasset, Health Office. And the logo in the bottom, my right-hand side, of the flyer is the last logo from 1994.
Wow.
We actually have a T-shirt that was procured at that time, and we have it, we probably ought to frame it. The plan is to, Earth Day is actually April 22nd, but it's right at the end of school vacation, and it's a holiday weekend. Mondays aren't good to hold townwide events on, so we moved it to Saturday the 27th. We have all the planning to execute is in place. We were at the Health and Rec Fair on Sunday, signing up groups and parents and individuals who want to participate in the Earth Day cleanup. We've got, there's a number of areas that we've listed on the flyer, but we've got about 12 or 13, there's 3 or 4 that aren't here, that are on backups that we've identified that need to be paid attention to. And we've given everybody the option of, if there's an area that you know of that we haven't listed, then you're welcome to go pick it up there. The way this will work is that the event is gonna happen right in front of the town hall in the grassy area. We'll have 2 or 3 tables set up to do distribution of bags, do registrations, et cetera, hand out bags and T-shirts and like that, and give people the instructions, what we want them to do, how to stay safe, what areas not to go in, areas like 3A, do not go on 3A at any cost, et cetera, don't go in deep water, things like that.
Without your waders. Yeah.
Stay on the sidewalks, et cetera. So, the planning is all pretty much in place. We are fundraising to, take care of the cost of the T-shirts, the marketing materials. We also, as an element of this, we've also, organized for educationally, environmentally themed, forums. 2 of them were already existing. The health agent had already committed to do the Hate Ticks program, which is April 2nd at the senior center. And we just brought it in under the umbrella of, the whole Earth Day program, so that we're going to blast it out. Kevin has agreed to do 143 for us and all these things. We've got the school blackboard participating with the community blackboard. The library is going to use their list, and the senior center is using their resources to put it on their website. Chris is gonna put it on the website, homepage for the town. So we're gonna have it pretty well distributed. The schools got involved because we asked them to run a logo art contest for a new logo for this event, and pretty much annually, we agreed that we thought we would do this every year and have a new logo every year. We want it to be an annual event.
Gets buy-in, yeah.
And, grow as it goes along. It's free, we're not, nothing, nobody has to pay for anything. We're fundraising again, and we're close to what we need, and, we still have a month to go before. So we're pretty confident we need about $4,000 to pull it all off correctly.
So today, you're coming for the permits to just do the work throughout town.
Yes.
And then in terms of the organizations that you have assigned to different cleanup sites, are you looking for more of those?
Yes.
More groups?
Yeah, we're looking for contributions and people to show up. We had a really good reception at the fair on Sunday. We had about 15 families very, very interested in being there with their kids.
Yeah, great.
That's what we were hoping for, to get, families involved. We have a couple of groups of the school kids. We're working on a couple of sports teams. We've got most of the, clubs in town. We've got both the garden clubs and a lot of other folks.
CSCR, things like
Yeah.
that. That's great.
Yeah, Jack Buckley's on board with his program as well. We did the same thing with Jack. The State of the Harbor was already a planned program, but we put it under our umbrella so we could really get, because it was, environmentally themed, so we could really get as many people as possible down to that as well. Because it's gonna be a pretty good, we've got the marketing calendar, the campaign program is all worked out, when everything needs to drop, and,
Great.
everybody, all the channels have been approved, and
Want the pros in.
it's all locked down.
Great. Okay, Chris, also, just in terms of the website, can we also put this on the town Facebook page?
Yep.
Only 'cause it'd be really good to
Everywhere.
get people
Yeah,
to start looking there for a
Yeah,
lot
no,
of town
yeah.
announcements.
yeah, we appreciate that.
So where do people
And-
go if they wanna sign up and volunteer?
They can send Tom Callahan an email to Tom Callahan, they can send an email to me. That's about, they can sign up on the morning, there's no reservations or anything.
And where's everybody gonna stage from on the morning? Is
Right
there-
in front of the town hall, right in front of the grassy area in front, we'll have tables set up with a banner, we have a banner, and we'll do everything there, maybe, you know, we're trying to get everybody to show up, maybe take a picture, you know, everybody.
Before you head off.
Yeah, we're getting dumpsters, 2 dumpsters donated, and we're planning to put the 2 dumpsters in the parking lot. They'll be here after 1 o'clock on Friday, and they'll disappear before 8 o'clock on Monday morning. Because the plan is to bring everything back to the dumpsters here. It gets complicated to have everybody go to, you know, pick up everything and go to the dump because it's mixed trash. And to sort everything, I'll give everybody 4 or 5 bags apiece, plus it's in bad shape usually when it's in the water, the rubbish and all that, you know, it's not clean, recycle. You know, and the only thing that's really valuable is cardboard boxes for the most part. Most everything else is, we have to pay to take away, so. So we opted to get the dumpsters so that people can just bring back a bag with everything in it, throw it in the dumpster. Away we go. We're also, Chris has arranged to have 1 crew in a dump truck available for 4 hours, 11 to 3, for people, you know, we've got a lot of older people that are also involved. If the bag gets too heavy or too ugly, you know, we can send the truck to pick it
DPW
up.
crews.
If there's large things that, you know, they can't handle, that are, you know, on the side of the roads or whatever, then we can send a truck to pick it up. I don't think it'll be a big deal, I don't see a lot of big things around, but, you know, there may be some things. So we'll have the truck for 4 hours.
So everybody can show up the day of on the common in front of town hall,
Yeah.
get assigned to a group and go.
Yeah, and there's a PR piece going in the Mariner next Friday, this Friday, I'm sorry, this Friday. So the campaign really kicks off this Friday. And behind you is the winning entry for the logo.
Oh, very nice. Oh, I like it.
Who did it?
Bridget Wixton,
Wow.
12th grader.
Wow. Very nice.
Nice.
Watercolor.
And we're going to be at the school committee on April 3rd we're gonna give her an award, you know, gift and a gift certificate for being the winner.
That's terrific. That's really
Yeah,
nice.
it was really, we got about 60
Submissions?
pieces of art from the kids.
Really?
They were great. I mean, and a lot of applause. Stephanie Moriarty and Nina Berkowitz,
Berkowitz,
who spearheaded the whole
Yeah.
thing, and
They know how to
you
get
know,
the
Louise green lighted it, and it was great.
Oh, that's terrific.
It worked
I
out.
was gonna say the 1994 actually held up relatively well, but that's way better.
Mm.
Okay, so we will certainly do our part and remind people and gather
Yeah.
forces. Tonight, we need to just take action on issuing an event permit for April 27th with a rain date of April 28th from 8 a.m. to 3 p.m.-ish
Yeah.
throughout town.
We have insurance coming. I just don't have the certificate. The town will be named as a co-insurer.
Okay.
And it's for both days, it'll be, you know, it covers both days if it's a rain day.
All right.
Okay.
Anyone wanna make a motion?
Yeah, move that we issue an event permit for Saturday, April 27th, rain date April 28th, for the Town of Cohasset Earth Day Cleanup, sponsored by Open Space Committee?
Well, it's open space and rec in coordination, you know, with the Chamber of Commerce as well.
Sponsored by half the town.
Yeah.
By Open Space.
Just say Earth Day's
And
ready.
rec.
Second.
Thank you. Save me.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Good, great work, this is fabulous.
And,
Thanks, Peter.
we will get the chiefs involved, you know, we'll make sure they know what's going on. You know, I've talked to Chris about it already, he seemed to think we wouldn't need, you know, detail of any kind, but just so they're aware that, you know, a lot of people out and about. It should be over fairly quick, because I think we're gonna have a fairly large turnout.
Good.
At least
Agreed.
it feels that way, and I hope we do.
Thank you.
Oh, is that being covered at all by 143, the TV? Yeah, so we'll be getting,
Yeah, Don's gonna do mostly the educational forums. but we weren't necessarily gonna, I don't know, were you planning on doing the actual cleanup?
Sure.
They have a mobile
No.
camera.
12 years
Well,
old.
how do you handle people's images? Do you have to get, a sign off on it?
Usually don't.
You don't have to do it, used to.
People can,
Not if you're in public.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'm just
It's
asking.
like the
Yeah,
races,
we
they
gotta move
cover the
on.
races, the
Um,
parades.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you,
you very
Peter.
much. I appreciate it.
See ya.
Our next order of business is
Thank you.
cable contract renewals. We're a few minutes early. Are you okay? You have who you need to be here? Council's here and, okay.
Hi.
You wanna come on up and
Good, thank
introduce
you.
yourselves and
So.
walk us through?
Do you,
Chris can
there was a
cue
bunch
it
of
up.
stuff sent out electronically. Does anyone
Yes.
need a hard copy of any of this? I have it if we need it.
The only thing we're likely to do is to read
So you sit up there.
The only thing I got today in
Motion.
the mail was budget info.
This was
and
in our
Complete
packets.
Streets.
This was in the packet last week.
but this
Thank
is
you.
some extra information, but. So I'm gonna have you both introduce yourselves and then, I guess walk us through the memo and the details of that.
Sure, yes, thank you. Go ahead, Nick.
hi, Nicole Ross, Chairman of the Cable Advisory Committee here in Town of Cohasset.
Thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
Hi, Bill Solomon, your town special cable counsel. Good to be here before the board. I've been working with the town for a while.
Nice to meet you, Bill.
You too, thank you. Great, well, why don't I just give you a brief overview of where things are in cable and, in Cohasset. And the good news is that the town is doing very well, and we're pretty much at the end of the process in one license. And the other license I expect to be done very shortly, and I'll explain why there's delays on Verizon's part. So, the memo I had today, and I'll just walk you through it, just talks about where you've been and where you're going on cable. And as you know, cable television at this point is a mature business, and there's changes in the field. There's video competition over the internet. There are regulatory changes with the FCC, so that it's unlike the past 30 years. There's not going to be the same stability going forward. So it's important for a town like Cohasset, or any town, frankly, to take that in consideration when you're doing a license. And the Comcast license would be a 10-year license, and I'll explain why I think that's in your interest. It's important to take into consideration that the field is changing, the dollars will be changing, and to make plans for the future so that you'd be in the best position to address those changes by not having to prematurely either give up services or ask the taxpayers to pay for what's been paid for through the cable provider and its own customers. So with that, I just mentioned that this is on the Comcast license on the handout. The current license was a 10-year license from April 15th, 2009, expires April 14th, 2019. The number of subscribers for Comcast at the end of 2017, the new number, the cable division does not have Comcast's new number for the end of December 18, but the number at 17 was 1,904. The Verizon cable subscribers, 1,087, so a little, not quite half, but fairly close. The total cable subscribers, almost 3,000 cable subscribers for the town. The PEG access annual support. PEG, as you know, is Public, Educational, and Government Access Community Television. Under the current license, the PEG operating support began at 3.85% of gross annual revenues. The maximum allowed under the Cable Act, under federal law, is 5%. It then went down on a sliding scale under the current license to 3.5%, and then to 3.2% where it's currently is. The Comcast is not paying currently on non-subscriber revenue. That's advertising revenue, home shopping, but mostly advertising. That historically could be between 5 and 6% of Comcast revenues. Under the terms of their license, is read literally. I think, frankly, one makes a better argument. I think that revenue should have been included. I understand why they didn't pay it, but it's not accurate. we use that in the negotiation, just to point it out, not as a threat, but to say, you know, you really should have been paying this, but you know what, let's look to the future and get a good license going forward and not fight about the past. So the proposed license and what we're now in the process of finishing the draft. I've been negotiating with Comcast on some legal provisions that are in licenses now in a few other communities. And today we reached an end on that. So that I've talked to Mike Galler, the government affairs representative for Comcast. He and I have got licenses done in a week. It's pretty fast, but if sometimes you do it that quickly. I'm going to be providing the committee and the town administrator who's worked closely with the committee and myself a copy of that draft license next week. We'll review it. I'll provide it to Mike Gala. And I think because we've worked out the fundamental terms, I don't expect that to be a long process. That license will, I believe, protect the town as much as possible and frankly greatly. So
Excuse me, it'll be another 10-year license?
10-year license, right. And in a nutshell, the reason I think 10 years makes sense is that it's a changing world. Authority of municipalities is not increasing in the telecommunication world, so that my theory has always been, and I think it's more true now than ever, if you can't get a good license, then we don't sign it and we take other action. But if you can get a good license, like a long-term mortgage, you lock that in. If something changed down the line, it's nice to know that license is there. If cable TV happened to go away, I don't think it will statutorily, but if that sort of legislation would have to provide whether or not your existing license continued. And if you had a 10-year license, you'd be glad you did. On the other side, for Comcast, it's in their interest not to do this every 3 years and to have that expense and worry. And they're a good cable company, and they like being a cable company, so they're fine as we are with that 10-year license at this time. So the proposed support for PEG access and the 10-year license going forward would be 5% of gross revenues. That, as I said, is the maximum allowed under federal law. And the definition, although it implicitly includes advertising now, will explicitly include advertising, so that would be some additional funding. The increase from 3.2% to 5% is a 56.35% increase in the gross revenue, and that doesn't calculate in the increase from the advertising. Roughly speaking, approximately $45,000 a year under current revenues for those revenues.
Okay, so that 45,000, do you mind me taking questions while you
No,
go?
sure.
So that 45,000 would then go, what, to the cable advisory and corporation, I guess it is, and all of the fund your activities, is that correct? Is that where that money's going?
Well, I'll let you answer that if you like.
Well, it's really up to the board. I mean, so right now, that's where it all goes.
That's where it goes,
Yeah,
right?
in some communities, there's a little piece that comes off to handle, oversight and stuff. I mean, we could talk about that, because I think the contract with the cable is coming up as well.
Well, that's why I was gonna wait till these contracts are signed and come back and renew the second extension of our CCTV contracts with the town of Cohasset. And that, at that point, I thought it'd be a good time to, change those contracts to take a percentage off to keep in your own holding account for any type of other expenses you may have.
On your holding account, you mean, yeah.
We'll withhold it from us. We get a direct pass-through of 100% of the dollars
Right,
that come
yeah.
from the cable committee, the cable providers to our nonprofit. That way we manage the funds for the access.
Yeah. Now, I will at the end talk briefly about this potential, it was in the Globe this past week, FCC regulation and what that means, because that would take significant dollars from the dollars we're speaking about now. I'll talk a little bit about that at the end.
Before you get there,
Sure.
Just step back for just a
Yeah.
second. So I understand you're proposing going up to the maximum, a bit like being a New York cap, right? What's posted on the door is the maximum. So my question then is, if you're including advertising, and this is for the purposes of local access, I assume you're referring to advertising from the local area.
Well, interesting enough, it's advertising on your local system, and it doesn't matter if it's local or national.
So you're actually going for the larger.
All advertising would include all advertising, and almost every community that has a good license has a full definition. In a sense, what gross revenue is, it's their revenue, and what really stands out in the modern day is taking things out of that revenue.
Yep.
The idea is that that's the system that they're using. Your public way, as I always tell people, use a public ways that you buy and maintain, police, insure, clean, repair, and when cable companies first came, they wanted to use your way to make money. And the federal, in 1984, there was a cap on that at 5% of gross revenues. So in any, I think, good cable license, as they're developed, you don't exclude categories of revenue. In fact, it makes it more complicated in some ways. What they earn in the Cable Act over the cable system to provide cable services revenue, and exclusions from that, besides being less dollars, it actually can complicate things.
Okay, and then along those lines, do you have data that shows how Cohasset's use of direct cable television has changed over the past 10 years? And I'm thinking of numbers of households or numbers of installs as an example. So as you point out, there's some, I think, 3,000 total users, somewhere in that neighborhood between Verizon and
Yep.
Comcast. But I was actually thinking about it because from that prospect, 10 years ago, the all-inclusive package, if you will, video, internet access, phone, was really just beginning to fly. And so is there a possibility that our households have actually become a greater cash cow beyond just price increases to the cable companies?
Yes, we do have, in fact, I did a sheet, and I just didn't bring it with me, that compares the subscribers for 10 years for both companies.
Okay.
And Cohasset's very steady. We'll see what happened in 2018. But, as I say, if you live in Somerville and people are on their phones and they may not get cable or cut the cord or shave the cord, but Cohasset, like most communities, outside of those millennial type communities, has had a steady cable subscribership, and I would expect that to largely remain that way. People might change some services, of course, but remain that way. There's no question revenues have gone up, but going forward, because there will be more video competition, price increases on cable will be more constrained. And in addition, I'll get to the FCC issues. So that the price side will be pretty stable. What I will also say is that because of the fact there's competition, that there's no mathematical certainty that when there's a franchise fee, your subscribers pay that. The company has a right to put that on the bill and say 5%. But that doesn't mean how they determine their rate in a free market based upon supply and demand, and how that increases would or lack of decreases would affect how many subscribers they have. That they'll set that rate so that that there's not a direct correlation at all. I used to say I represented communities at a point in time where the Amherst paid $50, and if you were a subscriber, and there was a $2.50 franchise fee. Well, if you were in Deerfield and Sunderland, if you were in Amherst, you might say, look, the town's costing me $2.50, $2.50 out of that $5. Well, in Deerfield and Sunderland, what do you think Comcast charged at that point? They've changed a little bit since, the same $50. So that, that's a decision that they make. When any business's costs go up, that business has to determine whether or not they're going to increase their price. The fact that they can say in the bill, this is what the town's responsible for, that's just putting it on a bill. So, I think that's important to understand. It's not a tax. It's a user fee to use the public way, just like their fees to rent buildings or to buy paper, hire attorneys, and they decide how that affects their price, not us. Or finally, put another way, if the town were to say, use the public way, don't pay us anything, we hope you keep prices down, would you sign something that says you'll keep our price down that amount? They wouldn't do it. And can you guarantee that they would lower it and not raise it? No. So as a result of that, what's important is what the Cable Act says, is to figure out what your needs and interests are for cable, what community television means. And working in Cohasset, what I've seen is that program is really expanding, improving and expanding. And what I've seen across the state, 'cause I work in, 100+ communities, that a community that has good community television, that has on sports and cultural events and the government meetings, religious services at times, those communities that have good community television are usually communities that are hitting on cylinders, where people work together, where the local economy makes a difference. And I know that's true because there's a lot of folks in Cohasset who have, from culture to small businesses to the community life, and that's what you have going for you with your community television. And as if the town wants even further improvements, you should express that to the nonprofit who's there to really meet your community needs going forward. So if that answers that, the next point is the PEG capital. And PEG capital is outside of the 5% franchise fee under the Cable Act. The current license provided $25,000 paid within 30 days. The proposal here, agreed upon between the parties, subject to the board being in agreement, is $95,000 over 10 years. Paid, as the company preferred, to pay at $9,500 per year. That means that they will not charge their customers an interest on that. That's really their business, but there's a benefit that the interest rate is back from 1970s. It's 11.25%. Again, that's what they charge their customers. So that it's gone from $25,000 to $95,000. In addition, there are public educational government access channels. As you know, you currently have 2 PEG channels. The proposal is, and I'm finalizing this with Mike Gallagher, Government Affairs Rep, who's done an excellent job. We'll have a 3rd channel. I think the position is going to be on the town we've taken so far is to have the 3rd channel right away. It's possible it just would be upon 12 months' notice, but that would just be noticed by the town. In addition, and this is a new wrinkle that's occurred, Comcast has finally, to their credit, caught up to technology here, to what some other companies have done, and they're going to provide a high-definition channel. I know that the committee was very interested and adamant that be done. Comcast is now providing that. The agreement made is that it'll be within 4 years. We certainly hope it's sooner. They wanted 5, the committee and I wanted shorter. We agreed on 4, but with the important aspect that Comcast has sort of been all over the map on this, that there's no charge to the town for that, meaning, yeah.
And is there,
No, after you, Kevin.
is there a provision then in that would make that enforceable in terms of they're gonna be penalized if they don't do that in 4 years? I'd like to make sure it gets done.
Yeah, no, that's right. In fact, where it's gonna be at the moment, it's gonna be in a side, Comcast changes its position a lot. It's been working on this and changing quite a bit, but at the moment, and Mike tells me it's not gonna change, it'll be in a side letter agreement, so a separate document signed by both parties, historically.
Why would that be a side agreement?
Well, they have all sorts of reasons they've gone back and forth as to why. Traditionally, if something's in a side letter, and sometimes there's side letters, but we insisted there'd be a side letter agreement. Sometimes they do it because they don't want the rest of the world to know. Sometimes that's the most common reason, that they don't want everyone else to know that they agreed to that in this community. It's still a public document, but it's not on the state website.
And it's written in such a way that there's a penalty if they don't need it then?
Well, the penalty would be, they'd be in breach of contract. I'll say this for Comcast, I've never seen them not live up to it. But we insisted, and the committee and the town administrator and myself, that it'd be an agreement and not a letter. A letter, of course, would be unenforceable.
Right.
An agreement would be, in
It'd be a
theory,
breach of contract if they didn't do it then.
be breach of contract, right?
Maybe you could ask them at the same time, just to give you some assistance, so that they set up a streaming channel while you're waiting.
Well, that's something I think with adequate funding, my understanding is that the town and Access wants to proceed ahead with, and that's important to do, particularly because
It's a particularly strong lever.
yes, and they don't currently the Comcast is not providing anywhere PEG access video on demand. I was able in the Vineyard to get the electronic program guide on there, but because there's one head end that serves all the towns, they don't do that elsewhere. So that's a nice compliment. Obviously, Comcast knows is in the business also, so it's a nice complement to the cable TV portion of this.
It's a bit off topic, Bill. The reason I bring this up is that, as you may or may not be aware, that what we typically relied on for local news was the local paper. Local paper is now effectively regionalizing their activities, and you notice we haven't had a reporter here in the
Three meetings.
Three meetings. So there's no real-time reporting of news, and I frankly think that there's every opportunity with enough funding to promote the distribution of that news through cable access.
Absolutely. No, I mean, everywhere, and it's a fantastic point, that this is localism. This is what the community's about, and then when those papers are regionalized, they're gonna cover the sensational stuff, but they're not gonna cover the things that matter to the folks in town in their daily lives. So access with more funding, sometimes you have to be a certain size to do a news program, but they could have a news magazine or something that would allow those messages to get out.
Yeah,
And-
I leave it to the folks who
Yeah.
are skilled at that, but
Right.
we've actually managed to produce a few people who've gone on in these careers, so.
Yeah.
Well, we
There's-
actually,
gosh knows, there's some interest in
no,
doing
I think it's
so.
a great point, and I think we actually should discuss that further with the cable committee or wherever it's appropriate to
Rather
start
hear
getting,
from them on
Right.
this one.
yeah, to get more,
Right,
more news.
We'll do that later in the month, right, when we get them back.
Was there any discussion as far as, certain cities have regional areas that are access, free Wi-Fi, so you're walking down the street and you want to use your data, you can pick the local one. Philadelphia's a classic example. There's a whole section downtown Philly and
Right.
other areas of different towns. Orlando has it as well, where there's regions that are in the town, particularly downtown, that have internet access that's
Right.
available.
Well, because it's a cable license and they have these different categories in the Telecommunication Act, that would be outside the scope. I think in Philadelphia, because it's where Comcast is headquartered, they do those,
They did that.
have those programs. But that is not it wouldn't be within the jurisdiction. And Comcast has increased, doing Wi-Fi in communities. In fact, they're now back in the business after having given up of cell phone service. But because of the nest egg that we have here with cable under the laws, that wouldn't be something that they would engage in or we'd have authority on. It's always something that the board could discuss with Comcast outside of the license.
Right,
And we have the town fiber network, at least in the core, so we could, in select that area, set up our own town Wi-Fi, and we have the capability of doing that, if it's provided as funding for it.
Wayne, I'll get to you after, I wanna try to get through this contract, cause we're on
And
a
this
tight
is about
schedule.
that, so.
Yep,
So can I,
yep, go ahead.
on, so is it safe to say then, as Steve was asking earlier on, the number of users that has been pretty much 3,000 for 10 years?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't
Yeah,
need
it's
the
probably
exact,
actually.
I saw them, I'll send them to you when I find them.
Yeah.
right, but it's roughly been 2,000.
It's gone up a little bit,
So-
maybe up until a year ago, it's gone up a little
Yeah.
bit every year. is my
So-
memory.
It may have flip-flopped back and forth, Comcast, Verizon.
Oh,
but
yeah.
it's
No,
been
I just want to get a
consistent.
total, so,
Yeah.
the thing is our population has gone up considerably over the last 10 years, so what that figure tells you though really is that there's really a trend of a fall off.
Well, no, but I think it's gone up, in other words, I don't have it here, but I.
No, you're talking about the total number, but our population's gone from, probably,
It's gone
a
up
couple of
seven-
thousand, it's probably
Yeah,
gone up
But
a
it's
couple of
just
thousand.
But our-
it's
but our
driven by
households-
housing units,
right,
not anything else.
households
It's not
has
the
not.
number of people, it's the housing.
But still, our housing units have gone up. And-
There's a small increase in housing units, but effectively the installs have probably kept pace, is what I think I'm
A
understanding.
little bit, yeah, they've gone up.
The hotels use this as an acronym called RevPAR, revenue
Right.
per room night, right? And likewise, a cable company looks at it and says, so for every install, what's my revenue coming out of that property? And that's kind of where I was going with this. It's a very good point, Kevin, though. We're going to start to stall out. I think the cable companies see the very same thing. So from our perspective, this is probably the most important contract we'll yet see and may see again.
Right. That's why it's good, it's 10 years, I think.
Right now,
But
yeah.
everybody still has to have internet, so you're still gonna have the hookups. You might not have the same bill size, because they'll disintermediate services to Sling or
I'm surprised
Roku or
there's over
whatever.
1,000 homes that.
But
do
the
it.
challenge is
not
we
gonna
don't share in that revenue. though.
Right,
Right.
right.
Can I just, one last question from that perspective. Up to this point, you're talking about this with Comcast, yet you mentioned before that you're effectively, the town is bifurcated between Comcast and Verizon almost equally,
No.
somewhat near equally.
Not really.
Well, the real question is, does this cover providers, and we're using Comcast as a label, does it cover equally the provision of cable television services?
For Verizon.
Yes.
Yeah. The Verizon, I've done a lot of licenses, it's a fairly quick process. I've done the numbers here, I think because of this stalling out since the beginning of the year, because Verizon had a new chief executive, some new people in the team. I keep in close touch with the representative, the representatives who work for Verizon, they're out of Massachusetts, the gentleman, Paul Train covers this area. I'm gonna be sending him the license, I had planned to do it already, but sending him the license draft sometime this week. We've talked about it, he knows that's coming. And that license draft provides that, it's a little different. First, it's 5 years. Verizon, when they first came for the renewals this time around, at this point 3 years ago, wanted to do 5 years and the right to get out at any time, and that wasn't acceptable to towns. They did 6 7-year licenses, but then they stopped doing that after the election in 2016. They've told Wall Street, and they've been very clear about this, that their goal and plan is at this point, within 4.5 years, to have no direct fiber service anymore, to do everything wireless. I don't think that's gonna happen. I think they'll have a mix, but their goal and plan, for different reasons, you can charge more, they don't have unions, all their reasons they would wanna think of, that they plan to be out of wireless, of wired line. So as a result of that, their view is they don't wanna have a license that's too long out, because they plan to transition. Again, fiber's tough to replace. I think I don't think they're gonna replace all of it. You'll have a world where some people get this and some people get that, but not everyone would get off fiber. So with that, the terms of that license would, as I see it, and I've calculated based on numbers that I put parameters on, and reach agreement with Verizon, that the same 5% of gross revenues for PEG operating, and a capital number that'll have a percentage of gross revenue and a set dollar amount that's consistent with licenses that I've done, that provides a somewhat of a premium on capital, because the thinking is, if they're gonna do a 5-year license instead of just the 7, much less the 10, that I articulated that the town should not lose that capital for that 2-year period. So therefore, they will, up until now, and I think going forward still here, pay somewhat of a premium on capital because of the shorter license. Another way to put it, if we said to Verizon, well, listen, you can pay less, just do a 10-year license, they would say they don't wanna do it. So they're the ones who choose years over capital dollars, and that should not be to the town's detriment. So with that, I've worked out a model license that I expect won't change much based on conversations, if at all. And so with that, there is the potential, but either based on the date we've discussed here for having a hearing with Comcast, there is potential to do 2 licenses the same day. It may be Verizon's later, it may be as I proceed ahead in the next week. I expect to hear from Verizon tomorrow. Paul Train had met with.
So does the Verizon license expire the same day, April 14th?
No, it expires
so
in December.
We have a little bit of time.
Right.
Okay.
But in my perfect world, I like to do them the same
Oh,
day. So
absolutely.
if possible, we'll do that, but if not, that's fine,
Okay.
because both licenses are fair in comparison, and I'm not concerned that Verizon will say, well, the Comcast is more favorable.
Sure.
That said, the benefit of the same day is that you're done.
Right.
So I'm gonna try to see if we can do that, and if we can't, and if we can't do that, let's say even another day in April or May, then we're gonna proceed ahead with Comcast and then go right into the Verizon license, which I don't anticipate will take much time if things remain the way they have been, which I think they will.
So I'm gonna ask us to focus on Comcast, which is what we're here
Yes.
for tonight. I'm willing, because there's people in the audience that had a question on specifically the information we're talking about. Is everybody okay?
Yep.
Wayne?
Yeah, I've got just a couple of questions. One is, does all revenue include any business or residents, or are businesses excluded from the franchise fee?
Yep, well, good question. All business and residential.
Okay, now, does it, and I got a little confused when Jack made a comment, does it include internet access on your cable bill?
No, only the cable revenue.
So eventually, everything may be going over internet, so that in fact may end
Right.
up being a real problem.
That's the challenge
the point.
for cable.
And then the second one, and there was no mention about it, is in the past, we've had the ability to have the cable companies wire all of the town buildings. Now, some we've wired with fiber, but I'm wondering whether we could have them do it to any building or facility. And the reason I say facility is that the sewer department, for example, has these remote pump stations. And right now, we have to pay the telephone company to run lines there that we could use a cable line for, or, you know, and be able to gather that information, or if we wanted to set up a camera somewhere or anything like that, we would not have we would have to pay it to pay for it, just like retail.
Right.
So is the buildings still in the contract?
Sure.
Bill, do you mind if you just talk to us
Sure.
so that people at home can hear
Sure,
the
yes,
answers? Thank you.
you know, Chris first can address that, to the credit of the town, of the board, the town administrator, as Chris indicated, you have a municipal fiber network. A lot of smaller towns don't. So that is typically the way you would address all your fiber needs, whether it's telemetry at a pumping station, or security, or data, or telephone. So that this license does not. And this license continues at point number at the bottom of page 2. It continues the current video return locations that you can go live Comcast from the town hall or the high school, middle school. And Verizon has an interconnect at the town hall and an auxiliary link at the high school, middle school. So that would remain the same under the current license.
So we have a senior center that would be great for, you know, additional
Right.
capacity for TV.
Right, and that's apart from getting cable TV, but in terms of becoming live from a location, that there are
Yeah,
two
I mean, to
possibilities.
have live at that
Right.
location,
So
I
the two
think that would
possibilities
agree
would
with
be, one is, with the additional funds, you could use that to expand your municipal fiber system.
Right.
And so the benefit of that is, one is, it's your system, you can build it cheaper, frankly.
Yep.
And
Can you imagine a town that actually
and
needs
you
something
can
cheaper?
and you can use it for all your needs, not just video return, which Comcast would provide it now, but you can use it for all those other needs, data and everything else, which helps. And then finally, with this proposed FCC rule, which is made up whole cloth, not based on any law or history, the proposal is that when Comcast provides in-kind benefits, requirements, that they're allowed to count that toward the franchise fee. So it would subtract, so if it counts toward the franchise fee and they pay you 5%, well, it's taking up that space, so they're gonna give you less dollars. So going forward, getting in-kind benefits, if that rule goes in effect, which it's likely to go in effect, it's also likely to be overturned, but you can't guarantee that, that we're better off getting the dollars as part of capital and using it for those other, there are side issues on that I won't get into, but that's the way that you should go, to have a future for 40 or 50 years with your own fiber, rather than asking Comcast to do it, and the additional funds will potentially help you do that.
The last
So in
one
other
was
words,
on FiOS.
Hang on, Wayne.
so in other words, if we get the money up front, we can wire it how we want, as opposed to Comcast coming in, we'll plumb the system into the senior center, and they'll charge us more, and we can potentially do it cheaper and have it available for pretty much any.
That's right, with the caveat that because cable money is supposed to be used for cable purposes, connecting the senior center where you've articulated, there's an interest in getting video back. It's fine that it does everything else, but if you pick the pumping station, that wouldn't be for cable purposes, so I'd say that would really be something you would do on your own. Of course, if it's a pumping station, you have sewer and water, that could maybe bear the cost of some of those connections and save them money going forward, a win-win.
Wayne, did you want to finish up? Wayne, can you
Sure.
address us,
Yes.
just because it's easier for the people at
FiOS is
home?
basically fiber optic going on a telephone pole.
Yep.
Is FiOS, which is delivering everything by the internet, okay, is that technically not chargeable in our contract?
So the cable portion of FiOS is, when Verizon first had to decide what to license, they had a choice of saying, well, they'll say they're streaming video and they're not a cable system and they will not get a cable franchise. AT&T took that perspective across the country. Verizon, to its credit, said, well, we don't think that's a cable system. We think that's our FiOS system. But we grudgingly admit that we're providing cable service, which they were. So as a result, the cable portion of that is part of the cable system, and those gross revenues are your gross revenues. One of the things that I managed to do last time and this time, actually, the only licenses in the state on the Verizon license, it's not an issue on the Comcast license, is to make sure that we have language that provides some protection with respect to the issue of bundling. Because the bundling challenge is when they charge one price for all three services, how much is cable?
Cable, right.
And with a world that's changing, and there's less internet competition, but more video competition, what you're seeing is the incentive and the reality for some companies. They're saying, well, cable, they used to say it was $80 out of $120 of the bundle. Now they want to say, oh, it's only 40 or 60. Our license in Cohasset for Verizon, unlike other licenses in the state, will not say that the bundle, that the cable portion is determined by how Verizon keeps their books in accordance with applicable law and regulation. There is no applicable law and regulation, and we don't want to agree. It's how they keep their books.
Right.
They can say anything.
Right.
Ours will say this time around that it's done under GAAP. The GAAP rule, in effect now for a year, says you look at the individual prices they sell. Not a perfect comparison, but the individual prices to figure out the value of the underlying of each service within the bundle. So if cable they sell for 80 and internet for 40, and then now the whole bundle is $90. You use those same percentages to figure out how much of that bundle is each service. And our license will say that nothing prevents them from attributing more money to cable service than otherwise required by GAAP. So that potentially could have huge savings for the town on its franchise fee, because 5% of half the number is no longer what you expected to get. So we will be protected on that with Verizon, and the Comcast license is silent on that, as it should be, and will be, there's always the challenges, but we're not agreeing. However you keep your books is fine with us. It's not. So, good question. Thank you.
Could you now walk us through what action we need to take tonight
Sure.
with respect to this friendly motion?
Yes, thank you. It's just because of the dates of meetings and Mike and I finishing the license, that we're gonna do this friendly denial, which preserves our rights and their
To
rights
continue
in this
negotiations.
formal process, which is like a trial that would be coming, that'll never happen.
Right.
And in the meantime, we'll finish the license, and this will become moot.
And this is required just because we're up against the clock.
That's right, because you're either, if you don't deny it, then something went wrong, they can say you didn't deny it. So it protects the town, it also protects, in its way, it protects Comcast. I do this anytime we're not quite there, but we are very close to being there,
Okay.
and I expect this to be signed, as I said, in April. If it's not April, it's only because we decided to move it to the beginning of May for the reasons I stated before.
And the requirements at April 23rd or whatever date we set this, it is an actual hearing? Okay.
Yeah.
Posted in
I think it's
advance?
10 days in advance.
14 days, and for
Oh,
now,
that's
we're
an
assuming we're gonna
opportunity.
go ahead on with that, even if we're not quite done with Verizon.
All
So,
You need a motion?
Yeah, so to read the motion, you want me to just read it really quickly?
I
if
didn't
can
know you
talk
had it in
fast?
front of you.
Was in our packets, is there anything, Chris, or Bill, or Nicole, that we need to do before we go right to this
I
motion?
think those are pretty thorough.
Okay.
yes, and I did notice this earlier today, a typo, I apologize, I just looked to show you what it is. On the last sentence, this will provide additional time for the parties to finalize an agreement, and for the town, it should say to issue a renewal license, not the word not, and I
To issue a
apologize.
renewal license, okay.
Other than that, it's fine.
Okay, I'm gonna read real fast. The Town of Cohasset Board of Selectmen is cable television licensing issuing authority. makes a motion to, and vote to issue a friendly preliminary assessment of denial of the cable license renewal of Comcast Cable Communications Management LLC to allow for additional time for the parties to reach a cable license renewal agreement. Whereas the town of Cohasset Town is desirous of completing the cable television license renewal process and reaching a cable license renewal agreement with Comcast Cable Communications Management LLC Comcast pursuant to the informal licensing process set out in section 626H of the Cable Act. Whereas Comcast and the town have engaged in good faith cable license negotiation process, and whereas the Board of Selectmen Board as cable television license issuing authority deems it prudent to protect the interests of all parties with respect to the formal license renewal process. Now therefore, because a renewal license has not yet been finalized and issued by this board, and in order to protect the interests of the town and Comcast as both parties work to finalize a renewal license agreement, the board pursuant to section 626C1 of the Cable Act hereby issues this friendly preliminary assessment of denial to provide additional time to complete the license renewal process and issue a renewal cable license. In order to protect the best opportunity for the parties to expeditiously reach an agreement regarding a cable television renewal license, the town will file a request motion with the Department of Telecommunications and Cable of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to extend the time for the town to file a written statement detailing the reasons for its preliminary denial pursuant to 207 CMR 3.063. This will provide additional time for the parties to finalize an agreement and for the town to issue a renewal license without the need to devote time and attention to matters other than the completion of the renewal license agreement. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Okay.
Well
How was
done,
that?
thank you for reading that,
Thank
I
Okay.
appreciate it.
My clear background.
We'll see you in a month.
Great, thank you.
Nicole, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
And again, thanks to Nicole, the committee, Chris,
I
really, the team was very helpful in the speed in which we were able to get this done with Comcast, so I thank them for that.
Excellent, and thank you for your expertise and
Thank you very much.
corralling our talent.
There you go.
Okay,
Thanks, guys.
next
Bye.
up
Thank you.
is complete streets policy. We discussed this a couple times, and Chris was going to make some amendments, which were sent to us earlier today. The,
Yeah,
Chris.
yeah, I'm, thought Pete would be here, but I don't have him here.
Okay.
So the,
He's gonna be
okay, so the board expressed an interest in changing the review group to include, there you go.
Come on up.
Speak of the devil, two citizens, and that's now been done. So the paragraph, the key piece of it reads, complete streets shall be carried out cooperatively with a multidisciplinary team comprising of 5 members. The Board of Selectmen shall be represented by the town manager, DPW by the Director of Public Works, and Planning Board by the Director of Planning. The Board of Selectmen shall appoint 2 citizens at large to the Complete Streets Committee who shall serve for 2-year terms. The review team shall meet at least annually and also is required to review roadwork projects. So that, I believe that effectuates the goals of the board. There's also a lot of other things in there that are actually important. The state judges your policy based on how many criteria you hit. And so Pete has really laced this with lots of key benchmarks. that they-
Achievable goals.
Achievable goals.
is a great term.
That we can reach in terms of benchmarking what's actually happened.
Okay,
So that was the big change that the board asked for in this now.
okay.
And again, as someone asked, this can also be, we can amend this at any time.
Anytime?
And Pete, if you just for us, before we take a vote of adoption, and obviously people can ask questions, but this policy needs to be set in place. And then there's an annual listing of projects.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct, so this this policy needs to be set in place, which will complete the tier 2 of this complete streets process. And then we'll set the stage for the prioritization plan. And that's what we're working on right now in draft form with that list of projects. And so that will be coming out, and then we'll submit that to Mass DOT. And then that will set us up for funding that we'll have to apply for to help get these projects done.
Okay, great.
We'll probably
And
see
that's
that in
something
a
we,
couple of weeks.
yep, that we talked about, maybe end of April, early May.
Yeah, once we complete town meeting, maybe the 9th or the 23rd, because
Okay.
we have another deadline for that.
Yeah.
If we wanna get we wanna get funding for the fall, we need to get the application out by
Yep, May 1st.
May 1st.
May first is the
So
prioritization plan.
And then, and the policy, we need to get that in now, so that
Right.
they get reviewed, so we can stay on track.
Before the prioritization plan.
Correct, about
Okay.
3-week lead time, lead it up.
Okay, is there a motion for adoption?
Make a motion, we, adopt the complete streets policy with the addendum as mentioned.
Okay, is there a second?
Okay.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Okay.
On with that.
Thank you, Pete.
Thank you.
Now, so there's a number of things to go through, since we happen to have Pete here, would you be willing to jump to, the discussion of Article 19, to hear what the planning board has done on the proposed harbor rezoning?
Sure,
And then
and
we can
take them
pivot
in
to the
order,
rest, 'cause-
yeah, I mean, it's, as long as it's under the agenda,
It's on the agenda.
posted as
Yeah.
8:10, so we're good. So we're gonna go right to Article 19, which,
Can I ask a question on
Yeah.
this? Is this informational, or are we waiting for, really, the question is, are we waiting for advisory's input on this as well?
we will not be taking a position on this tonight, this is informational, they're presenting to advisory, I think, on Thursday night, and
Okay.
then we would be making
Yeah,
our recommendation if we feel ready on
Thank you.
next Tuesday's meeting.
And in addition to advisory, like, we have counsel going back and forth with consulting, our consultant, to make sure that everyone's good with the
Some wordsmithing.
wordsmithing, exactly. That said, I think that the core is what you'll talk about tonight, which is the spirit of the ordinance, the proposed zoning.
Okay, you wanna walk us through this?
Yes, so,
Please.
there's a lot, there's 8 pages here, so, over the last, I would say 2 months, 3 months, the planning board has been working with, Harriman, the consultant for the harbor plan, to, create a overlay district that will to kind of spear redevelopment in the Cohasset Harbor area. Most importantly, the Cohasset Harbor Inn site. What we are doing here is we're creating an opportunity for the current owners of the Cohasset Harbor Inn to apply to the planning board to redevelop that site to, for the introduction of residential housing, at the Cohasset Harbor Inn site, but also additionally to the sites across the street, which are prime for development. Which you can see in the last page of the packet, you'll see a map, of the overlay district. So here, it defines the area within, and as you can see, there's about, 5 commercial properties. And then the Glass Harbor Inn site would also be part of it. And
Can I just ask a question just for
Sure.
orientation? So on the bottom here,
correct.
is that the Legion?
Yes.
Okay, thank
The
you.
Legion and Southern property,
Is, yep,
that's a town-owned property.
Mhm.
No one expects the Legion to change.
right.
I know that's a long
No
standing.
one ever has.
In the northern property, is
The
that a
northern-
home, a residence?
That is a mixed-use building.
Okay,
And so currently that building, I think, has 5 apartments in it. And then there's a commercial space, down below that is currently vacant. I know a few years ago it was a gym, but I think it's held, several different establishments
oh,
over
that's the
years.
gray building that has like the.
The
windows.
diamond
Yeah,
windows.
diamond-shaped windows,
Yep.
okay.
So it would extend all the way to that property on the northerly side, and then across the street, that would encompass the Grass Harbor Inn. And then we also included the Veterans Memorial. With any redevelopment, the site's gonna have to, include chapter 91, licensing through the state, because there are, common law tidelands upon that site. And so what would happen is, public access for citizens, would have to be introduced to that site in any redevelopment. And so therefore, a public walkway, a harbor walk, quote unquote, would have to be established, for public to kind of interact with that waterfront. So therefore, we did include the Veterans Memorial, so we can kind of look to the development and I would say the landscaping of a harbor walk, which would encompass all of Cohasset Cove. Or the Cove area,
Okay.
excuse me.
Yep.
And so as you flip through this, we did have, the procedures, the purpose, to encourage a vibrant mix of uses that would include multifamily residential to support increased public access, into commercial activity within the harbor. it's the number one thing we wanted. We heard from the citizens going through this process. They wanted public access to the harbor, and increased public access, but also more vitality along the harbor front, along the harbor's edge. You know, creating a draw for citizens to kind of interact with the harbor's edge. Procedures, the uses, kind of it goes down. I'm not too sure how much you want me to jump into the into the details.
Yeah, I would just kind of give us a snapshot of the relevant,
Yep.
changes and what the process would be. I think that's important.
The biggest change is we're allowing redevelopment. We're allowing, via special permit through the planning board process, mixed use residential, and we're trying to encourage redevelopment in that Cohasset Harbor area.
So right now, it's strictly business, its own business.
Correct. Right now, strictly, actually, the site here is actually is comprised of two zoning districts, underlying zoning districts. The Cohasset Harbor Inn site is under the Waterfront Business District.
Okay.
The sites here on the westerly side are of the zone are comprised of the Downtown Village District, and so therefore we're creating an overlay district and a I would say application process, an avenue for a redevelopment to occur. So the property owner can either apply to the planning board under the overlay district or use just the regular underlying zoning. Currently, right now, the Waterfront Business District does not allow for residential housing. And there's 3 waterfront business parcels of land. One is the Cohasset Harbor Inn, one is the Atlantica, and one is the Mill River Marine. So this is only encompassing one of those 3 parcels, and that would, under the Waterfront Business District. The creation of this overlay district is we're creating an avenue for redevelopment to occur.
Just a couple of things that one question that came up when I was reading this, because I don't know, and I made a point of not going to the hearings. But one is, I was happy to see that there's a number of references to the municipal harbor plan, and that this would need to fall in line with that.
Correct.
Which is something that we've been working on for over a year. And the other question I have, just as a resident of town, is just in terms of the scale of the buildings. Does the use or the overlay creating the opportunity for residential or mixed use, does that change sort of the dimensional aspects of what can be built there?
So, no, yes and no. I would say we did put a height limitation on it.
Good.
35 feet above base flood zone elevation. Because of the FEMA maps, we do have to use those new FEMA maps, but it would be 35 feet, which would be similar across town, and that would include the definition of height, building heights throughout the town of Cohasset. Right now, the definition for building heights throughout Cohasset is 25 feet, but it's an average between the ridge line and the gutter line.
Right.
So it's the same. So we're I will always say consistency is very important. So we're consistently using the same height definition. In this case, we're just using base flood zone elevation as the baseline, which is required with the new FEMA flood zone maps.
Okay.
So we're not trying to create anything bigger with more mass on the harbor, but we're just trying to create something that's smart, using the new flood zone modeling, and then with the consistency of what Cohasset has always used.
Right, for the character of the town.
For the character of the town.
Okay, any selectmen comments, questions?
I think you have one right there.
So with the uses and the special permit, you have to have a special permit before you go forward with the
Correct.
uses. The one thing that came up when I was kind of looking through the overlay district and zoning, I wanna make sure that town council looked at from the point of view of what they call spot or exclusionary zoning.
Sure.
That was a pretty firm Supreme Court decision in Bucks County where they had exclusionary zoning to limit development of lower cost housing and excluded that. I wanna make sure that the town council said this is okay from that point of view. We wouldn't wanna get it all the way through town meeting, gets voted on, people start looking for special permits and it's not okay. So is there any way to just be sure that it passes through town council for, specifically for spot or exclusionary zoning?
I'm working with town council right now. I'm working with Paul Durensis, town council. I'm also have used Karis North from Mercy after Toomey Lane in the development of this article, along with Emily Inns from Harriman, who is the main contact or the project manager, and has worked with me for the development of this article, as long as with the development of the harbor plan. So right now, I believe we're 100% clear that this does not violate any federal regulations concerning inclusionary zoning and indoor spot zoning.
At the last forum, the attorney was asked that twice, and the second time, I was surprised to hear her say, she said she was absolutely or 100%
She was for.
she didn't think there was any problem with the spot zoning being an issue.
Just
I
for
just
kind
wanna
of
point- I
no,
want-
can I say something, please? I think it's important for everybody to know that nothing gets on the warrant other than citizens petitions that aren't combed through by town council, for better or for worse. Like, everything does get reviewed. I wanna assure
Yes.
everybody that, well, we wouldn't put anything in front of the voters without having it go through as rigorous a legal test as we can. So, sorry, I just needed to say that.
First of all, there's no such thing as spot zoning, and the second issue is,
That's exclusionary.
the people in town were given two choices as to how they wanted to handle this situation. The will of the people was to go with a more restrictive overlay rather than something that was more broad. I think it would be very hard for an attorney general, a state attorney general, or a federal, I don't even think the federal government would even waste their time on this, to say that this thing was spot zoning or some kind restrictive or a benefit towards certain individuals in town. I mean, it was wide open. The folks in town drove this selection and this option for how we're gonna handle this, so, I think it's moot. I don't think there's an
Is
issue.
it possible to ask from the
It's-
audience?
Later, yes, I'll take questions later. Steve, do you have anything right now?
Not at the moment, thank you.
Kelvin?
No, 35 feet is what the height requirement is now, right?
Correct, for all
Yeah.
for all structures within town of Cohasset, correct.
So, one thing I'd like to have before we end this section, I don't know whether it's even right now or not, is I wanna get an understanding of what the process is gonna be that we're gonna be doing with this, Where's this going and when are we gonna be voting, just, I'd like that to be clear to myself and the board and the town, so,
Yeah, so.
before we're done this evening, that's all.
So in terms of this actual article,
Right.
right, so this is the first time, my understanding, and we didn't cue this up, that this has been, through a number of hearings at the planning board. They took a vote, we originally sent it to the planning board for
Correct.
hearings, we clicked that into motion, the idea, the concept, they had a number of hearings, they developed this, they voted on this.
Correct.
Can you share the vote with us?
Yeah, so it was four, there was out of 5 members of the planning board, 4 voted for, and then 1 member abstained.
And an abstention. And so now it's back to us with an affirmative vote from the planning board
Correct.
to put before the voters at town meeting. We typically wait for advisory, an advisory, lowercase a, advisory opinion from the advisory committee, who'll be hearing this presentation on, Thursday night.
Correct.
And then when we have their vote, we will have another opportunity next Tuesday to discuss it amongst ourselves, ask any questions that we might have come up with, before we make a recommendation to town meeting or not, and then it goes to town
And
meeting.
then it goes to town meeting for a vote. So, have we already voted this on the warrant? I can't remember. I don't think we have we?
No.
No, because you haven't.
So we have to vote it on the warrant
Correct.
and do a vote. And then the town meeting vote for this to pass would be 2/3.
2/3.
Yeah. So that would be the process.
Yes, and then from there we'll go to the Attorney General's.
That's what goes to what Paul was bringing up.
Correct, all bylaws, last year, the large horse review bylaw goes to the board, to the AG's office. The AG reviews all municipal bylaws, both general and zoning. You have to submit those within, I believe it's about 30 days after town meeting, and then once you submit those to the AG's office, they usually have 90 days to return, or not to return, but to
Give an opinion.
give an opinion on those articles, as submitted, and then once, if they're approved, they're, you know, they're kind of, they're mended into the fabric of the community's bylaws.
Our bylaws, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions now? Okay, I'm sure we'll have more questions by the time we get here next week. If you wanna come up and introduce yourself and address and, you know,
Amy Glassmeyer, 63 Howe Road, member of the planning board and also a professor of urban studies and planning at MIT. I would like to start out by asking Selectman Kanaly, when you said that the will of the people, could you help me understand what you meant by that?
you need to
No,
address the
this is
chair,
Okay.
sorry,
a legal
thank you,
case?
yep. If you wanna ask the question
Okay,
in
so
general, and
I
then
would,
if somebody.
I would like to just, because I wasn't involved in all the
Yeah.
hearings that the planning board went through, I'm trying to establish where the public said they had a view one way or the other as to whether or not it's a big or a small.
Okay, would any
Because
selectman like
last
to
week,
address
we
that?
had, actually, the last two times we had a meeting, we had somebody representing another homeowner or another property owner who was requesting to be incorporated into the actual, designation.
Who took the vote on this? Who took the vote on this?
The planning board.
Okay, alright,
That's,
anybody
no, I mean, the
wanna-
planning board voted on this, this is what they chose to do.
But at the end of our meeting, the last two times,
Yeah.
somebody stood up for the, as a legal representative of the Roy property, which is the lobster pound,
Mm-hmm.
and asked, why is it that why can't my client's properties be incorporated in this
Right.
designation?
we can't answer that question.
You know, but
You-
that's
you
why,
understand.
that's why I was
understand.
trying to ground whether, you know, where the notion that the people had spoken.
Yeah,
Well, from that perspective, I think it's fair to say that the planning board is elected by the people, and from that perspective, they're representative. Of course, the people hold the ultimate ticket as to whether or not they actually agree with that position by way of the vote. And I don't know that there's ever been a unanimous vote on anything in this town, with the exception of the budget, which tends to go by pretty quickly, although we will fight over small things pretty regularly. So while I understand that people will stand up from time to time and express their views which may be in opposition to the majority, I think although it might be a bit hyperbolic to say that the people have spoken, it's a pretty good example generally that when the elected boards take a position that they hopefully have been listening, and if not, they pay the price.
I just wanted to know, because factually I didn't experience that same,
Okay.
Thank you.
experience.
good, thanks.
What I'd like to say is a couple of things about the moment that we stand at, and I really only have 4 points to make. We have it is relevant from the standpoint as we're going to be making a decision prior to the receipt of two critical plans that are very much in play when we think about what happens to the harbor. If we were talking about something that was gonna happen on the commons, we would probably say, with a study coming to tell us what the change in town would be for the commons, we might actually say, well, do we wanna wait for that? And I feel like the discussion about the harbor is in that same vein. What we have now in the two studies, one is a general reconnaissance study, so you're gonna know the general condition of the harbor. It is not a master plan for the harbor, it's not telling you what should happen to the harbor, and it's not telling you what could happen for the harbor, it's just telling you what is the harbor.
Correct.
To some extent, the master plan is a bit like that. There are options at the end of a master plan that describe what you should do, but until it is essentially accepted by the public, it is a description of reality with some sort of, 5 to 10 year point of view. It seems prudent with this amount of research that's been done on town and many people involved in it, to ask the question whether or not making a decision to change a land use is warranted at this moment, and that whether or not we should wait to see what these two things come together.
And I think that's something we will certainly deliberate on, next week, before we decide whether to recommend this to town meeting, thank you.
Okay, the one last thing I'd like
Okay.
to say is that, unlike the town common, the water-land interface is complex, and this is a historic town. One of the most interesting aspects of it is its landforms. Coming right through the harbor area is a drainage area that may be consolidated, may not be consolidated. And without geotechnical analysis, do we want to put a development and a developer at risk with in a physical environment that we haven't ourselves done any exploration on, and which will not have been done in either the master plan or the harbor plan. So
Right,
I'm just
yeah.
raising the question of whether more information would make it safer and less risky for everyone involved.
I think it's important to know that this isn't greenlighting any particular development, as you know, because it will have to go through the special permit process, and I would imagine that, you know, drainage and just the landscape in the harbor will be taken into consideration when the planning board, if the planning board hears some kind of a development proposal through the special permit process. That would be my guess on how that queues up. I mean, I don't think we can do technical studies for things that we think might happen before we do some designs around, you know, how to overlay a particular area of land. So I think that is certainly a valid point, but I see that as something that is, will be the burden of the developer and a project person going forward. So, we have we have to do this as the selectmen with our expertise, which is very different than a planning board's expertise, and decide whether this is the kind of thing we wanna recommend to town meeting, and I appreciate your comments, so thank you. Is there anybody else who would like to public comment on this?
Just one very brief
If you need to come up and introduce yourself,
No,
sorry,
all
just
right.
'cause people are watching from home and wanna know who people are.
Jack Creighton, 23 Cushing Road. Very briefly, I think my comment is that we have a situation here in which developer and various committees, and I've been in a large number of the various things, have listened to the people, and they have scaled this back, and they've protected most of the harbor. There were some very large concerns about condo development kind of choking all around the harbor. The overlay removes that danger to the town and the harbor. And I also think it's very important that we understand we need to revitalize the harbor. It's a very important part of Cohasset. It's been neglected, and I'm not gonna weigh in as to the developer pro and con, but it is a local developer with a local interest in the town. So I think we ought to, for the board, when you make your decision, I think it's worthy to take into consideration. They have scaled it back, they have removed condos and residential from surrounding the harbor, and I think they've been responsive. So
Yeah,
I urge you to.
yeah, please, yeah.
Meaning no disrespect to, the, ownership group in the room this evening. We're here, and I remind the board that we're here entertaining this as an overlay district, not as a project.
Correct.
We do not entertain the project, and that's where that ceases, period. Any project that might go forward as a proposal from the result of this district falls under the auspices of planning board, if in fact the town were to adopt this. Let's not muddy the water with what the job is at hand for the selectmen this evening.
Thank you, that was the point I was gonna make. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Pete, anything else?
No, I, obviously, as a town planner, I expect to be at advisory on Thursday night, given the season's kind of run through, and then we'll be back in front of, you guys on Tuesday. If you have any questions, you wanna reach out to me prior to, please feel free to email me or give me a call or drop by the office. I'm happy to talk in depth about the process and what this would bring, to the opportunity that someone would have to apply for a permit. And I agree with you, Selectman Gomer, that's all we're talking about. You know, and we're talking about zoning, the creation of an overlay district, and that's it. And we're not talking about a project or the ownership group. We're just talking about an overlay district and how that could affect the town of Cohasset.
Go ahead, yep.
So where are the other overlay districts? Is one of the train station?
The TOD, the Transfer Oriented Development, that, obviously started as a very successful project.
Right, and then went through the same process.
It went through the same process, the material as you read through this is set up in the same zoning, I would say, organizational structure as the TOD. So we do have one in town. It was successful, and it's set up in the same format.
Was the village business district, is that an overlay or was that a rezoning?
I believe that was a rezoning.
Okay,
I think that was a rezoning.
okay.
So the TOD is the only overlay that you're aware of. On the top of your head, we're putting you on the spot after a long day of work.
After a
I
long
got it.
day of work.
You
Yeah,
got it.
no, I
You
think
got
there
it.
could be.
I think there was one other,
There was.
at the Cook Estate or something, or at the Toll Brothers, that never, it was adopted, but it never happened, no one ever used it.
Nobody ever
Yeah.
took
Nobody
advantage of or.
used it. That the Cook Estates and Toll Brothers
Yeah.
were developed under the residential cluster bylaw.
I think that's right, because back when the town wanted to, or, had the option to buy the Cook Estate, I think that was part of the plan, was
That's
for
right.
high density.
Yep.
High density housing.
And that was a special permit
Right.
to do that in addition to a subdivision,
Right.
which are just, and subdivisions and special permits are two different things.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Have a great night.
Okay, board good on this
Yeah.
matter? Board matter? Okay. All right, Chris, I'm gonna turn it over to you, and you're gonna walk us through the articles, let us know what we're ready to, what we can, what still needs to get put on the warrant.
So,
What needs-
we're gonna be a little old fashioned here for a little bit.
Paper?
Yeah. Chuck a lot of trees tonight.
Save a lottery.
Right,
We'll do a lot of recycling.
as
at
long
the
as
end
we
of
go
the
to
year.
Earth Day on the 27th.
So, let me talk about, if I can have Don come up just to get ready, if I can just talk, we'll just talk to the warrant really quickly. Actually, could you do me a favor? Could you- While I'm talking through this, can you distribute these various things? So there's a bunch of articles that you haven't voted on, we hope to go through tonight.
Are we done?
Yeah, there's one that's, there's 4 citizen petitions, and there are, 19 regular articles, including the one you just heard tonight, for the first time, the zoning change. Which, as you can see, it's a different font, we haven't figured all of that out, so, there's still, 5 that are still kicking around with the advisory. The capital budget committee meets again on Monday. We're 90% done. They didn't, unfortunately, because of people's travel schedules, they weren't able to get a quorum before their last meeting. So that's almost done. We're actually in really good shape on that, so, but you'll hear that. We can talk about it tonight, but you won't have it fully until next week. The CPC is now done. That's actually done, but advisory hasn't finished their work on that. We can talk about that tonight, but that will be all teed up for next week as well. The Article 16, if I can actually jump to that before we get to the budget, because I have Wayne here, I wanna talk about that a little bit.
Okay,
And I think we have a path forward that's a little different.
okay.
And then, the citizens petitions we can talk about when we get to the end. So, if you would mind leaping to Article 16, which is the relocation of James Brook, and I can have, if you would be willing to invite Wayne up, we can talk for just a minute. So,
Yeah, will you walk us through, and then
Yeah.
Wayne, are you comfortable coming up, or do you want Chris to?
so, Wayne, Mr. Sodjack owns, it's the captain's, what's that? It's Captain
Samuel
Sawyer
Bates'
House?
house.
Captain Bates, I'm sorry.
Samuel Bates.
Samuel Bates' house. That's his B, and then the land behind it. So he's been talking about doing some kind of a redevelopment. Before that can even happen, there's been an issue with the location of James Brook. James Brook culvert happens to run across the back of his property. And the conversation has been, well, how do we do this? It's very complicated. And there was a proposed article which the selectmen put onto the warrant, which would give the selectmen authority to negotiate and work through all of this. After having talked to town council, and had some other internal conversations, there was some concern about having an advisory, by the way, had a lot of concerns about how this might play itself out. So Wayne and I and Pete met earlier today, and a proposed path would be to have the town, kind of take this off for the moment, and then begin work with Wayne immediately to do an engineering study with the town, to come up with specific plans to relocate the book, and then have that all engineered, and then have a complete plan ready for fall, that the town meeting can then say, here's a very specific plan, which would decouple it from Wayne's proposal to actually redevelop the site. And there are grant opportunities, and he's already talked about doing housing and potentially affordable housing. There's actually grant opportunities we have because of the town's membership in a couple of programs. We might be able to get state grant money to do some of the public infrastructure work there, to do some of the brook relocation, to allow the housing development. That would, I think, might make this a little cleaner and a little easier, so it would be a designed, approved, ready to go plan before town meeting, rather than having to come back to this board and go back and forth. And we had a good conversation, we shook hands, and I think I think Wayne would prefer, of course, to get this done today, but I said we could start work on the engineering plan now. I mean, so long as he's willing to continue to fund it within reason. I promised him we wouldn't, we talk about how to make this work, and we'd use the work he's already done as a basis. And I'm also committing, and he wanted to ask, but I'm pledging that we will seek public funds for infrastructure redevelopment there, which the state has available. So that I think we'd all rather, if him spend money to make the buildings nice, and if we could find grant money that would help make the infrastructure work, let's do it. I mean, I think that's actually a smart way to go, and we can work on that now, and actually potentially get the town meeting in the fall, in November, with a plan ready to go, and perhaps even fund it. So,
So go ahead, Kevin.
What were some of the concerns that came up in advisory that generated this?
Well,
What are some of the major?
I think the major one was the uncertainty of it all, is that this is transferring a tremendous amount of authority without any specificity to the Board of Selectmen. And not that there was any doubt about any individual, or it was a very big ask of a transfer of authority without any specificity, because, admittedly.
Without any you mean by specificity, you mean any guidelines?
No plan. Yeah, so there's no plan, it's just, you have all the authority, go figure it out and approve whatever you think is a good idea.
Right.
And, admittedly, we're not sure. I mean, Wayne's done some preliminary work, but we're not entirely sure what the
Well, let me ask you a question then. If we weren't gonna be the authority, what's anticipated, that whatever is decided goes back to a town meeting though?
Yeah, so what we would do is we would come up with an engineered design that's done independently by a town retained engineer.
Yeah.
And come up with plans.
To redo the culvert so that property could or could not be developed, right?
Correct.
And that's sort of similar to what we just discussed with the harbor. We're making a sort of a change there, and whatever happens. It's an infrastructure thing we think is good for the town. Is that correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
it would decouple the infrastructure
With what's specific.
with any potential plan.
And then any plan would then go do what? Go through normal planning board process?
Correct.
Wouldn't involve us, is
No,
that what you're saying?
it would go through the normal channel of zoning, if there was any kind of zoning change, but planning board primarily, because the engineering would have been independently adjusted. And there may be other issues along the route that can be addressed
Yeah,
at the same
maybe there's
time.
other things we wanna do.
I think that's a big part of it. I mean, I think that this is gonna raise a lot of other issues about how that back area's gonna get developed. And, why make mistakes, right? I mean, let's just do it right.
Or maybe what else could be done with the culvert
Exactly.
that'll
Right.
allow
Yes.
stuff in the parking lot.
And it may
blah,
or
blah.
may not allow other kinds of development, so.
So we
you
should
know,
take a broader look
Yeah,
at
we
the
should.
idea.
And I think if Wayne's good, I think it
It could
increases
be
the
to Wayne's, it
probability
could be
of
to
Wayne's
everybody's
project going
benefit,
forward
yeah.
too.
Well, and also,
Could be an underground river float.
ultimately, the project
submarine
is a
base.
municipal project.
Yeah.
And I think
Tubes for
having
days.
the opportunity to look at what the possibilities are just with respect to the culvert gives us also an opportunity to look at what is possible there in general. I think, and certainly I'm speaking for myself, and I think others would agree, that when we went and did a site visit down there, we were pretty horrified just in general at the condition of the village. And, we all wanna make those improvements, but I think this particular project would necessarily trigger all kinds of things. Shouldn't we be looking at the parking lot? What kind of grants do we have for that? Should we be looking at lighting and landscaping? And it just would, because it would be a public project.
Oh, were we to have had that conversation when the tea came through?
Oh, of
By the way,
course.
we had that conversation.
Right, but I'm gonna tell you the same thing I told Paul, and the same thing I told somebody, a water commissioner a few weeks ago. No PTSD, we gotta keep looking forward.
And
I was
the
thinking
other piece of it is, the gas station's gonna get developed. I mean, there are already people working on it right now. That whole section, which is a big part of the downtown, is gonna change rapidly, and let's do it right. Let's just, take, if Wayne's okay with it, and, I think just do this right.
And again, I think that's really what this is a public works project, and there are funds that the town has now plugged into, and I believe that based on Wayne's intent to put some housing, particularly, some workforce or something like that, or veterans housing, that's the hook that we can get some infrastructure money, and it's not a multi-million dollar gigantic thing, it's critically important, but it's a very defined area, and I don't wanna say the state owes us, the state doesn't owe us, we didn't get any money in the first round. It's the second round of grants for the housing choice. I think there's a very specific project in downtown, I mean, it hits checks every box the state wants to check, right? And Cohasset, for the Cohasset to be able to do some redevelopment, again, this only makes it possible, it doesn't make the project, right? It just allows for the regular course of approval process to have, because right now, it's problematic at best for anything to happen because of the location of that culvert and the work that would have to be done around it, is that?
Right, I don't wanna make something that is put in with a shoehorn that isn't gonna really do what we wanna do.
Right.
And I think that Jack on the tour, and he pointed out, I know of a potential problem, and Jack said, we really should be looking at that, is that where I was going to end put the culvert in, right after that, there's been sinkholes on the edge of the gas station that probably are indicative of a problem with the culvert underneath. So making it, sort of expanding, ideas, like inspecting it all the way through again to, in the current term, in the next few months, especially this summer when it dries up and you can walk through it, would be very, very helpful in designing any changes, but also to add to the project to fix something that might be broken. It may be that instead of connecting where we are, it has to be extended 30 feet or something more so that it's all new from here all the way through. So looking at how it exists this summer is gonna be very, very important in the engineering of any relocation or whatever's gonna be done. The second part is exactly what I don't wanna have happen, that is, well, let's not decide on this one project here when all this other stuff should be done. So I want to include in our plans and in our applications for grants, to look at right from the athletic studios and stuff in the corner of Depot Court, and potentially running a sidewalk all along in a nicely set up fashion, sidewalk curbing, lighting on that whole side, so that backyard looks like a front yard, because Pompio's building and the other building there really are nice on both ends. There's a medical building in the middle there, and a few things. I know Stagecoach Way, they're looking to improve the look and feel of their place. It makes sense to start right there, come right on through, come to the end, and then say that we've accomplished something of great value to the town, in every case, and also allowing more business to succeed if they're locating in that back area and stuff. So I'm looking at my project really to be a catalyst to take care of West Main Street, like I've talked about for a long time.
Right.
And really turn it into something that's gonna be great for years to come.
Does the town have any of the plans from when it was built, of what type of construction is in there? Because
In the culvert, you mean?
yeah.
I think,
Because I'm wondering if when they put it in, I mean, there could be, and you see it around town, there'll be kind of chasms that are drains, that whether there is a true sealed pipe, or was it a shelf with walls, and some of it was sealed and some of it was where you have these sinkholes that would just drain out through natural chasms that would go down.
I think that point is what, I think we need to take a really more holistic
I'm just
look at
wondering
this.
what the town has available in the
And,
plans.
but at the same time, we're not gonna look at the culvert from, from Sanctuary Pond all the way to the end. It's really cool.
No, it's just a.
Right. That said, I think we have to assess it for a couple of different things, and Wayne's already done some preliminary work, which we can start that as a base, do some initial work. There's actually, we'll get to it in a minute, there's actually a one-time cost for some drainage and culvert projects, and we might be able to put some of that money into some work on this project. I think that this will allow us to get into a cleaner ability to get to yes in the fall, and separate the engineering piece from any potential development piece, which is
Right.
cleaner.
Because the question that everybody's gonna ask at town meeting in the fall, if it's there, is what's going on here?
Correct.
What is this gonna look like when it's done? what is it for and stuff, and so I think it really has to answer. I'm thinking about going, you know, I've already hired the architect to draw plans if the culvert's moved, okay? And I wanna go before the planning board and work on the idea of the sidewalk and that type of thing, and work with Pete and stuff on a new streetscape. I mean, and make it even nicer than the one we did in the center of town. I mean, it's really, there's opportunities to do some nice things after the experience that we have with them.
You know, and I think we, as a town, over the last year and a half, and we talked about it a little bit earlier, just we recognize that we need to look at all of these more globally, and do right by the vision of the town and the character of the town that we all want. And we do have these plans that are pretty much done, just not inked. And I think we have enough input from the community over the past couple of years that we know some of the things we need to do, and we don't wanna do one-offs or not do something and do it right. And you can't do this and realize your vision for the town without the town being part of it.
Right, and I don't, that's
So-
why I would start with the planning board and have meetings and have
Right.
things do it, but there's no, someone has to do it. The town is not gonna do it on their own without setting up a new committee, I do this, I do this, I do this.
Right.
And it's not, it may be something written in the master plan, but I doubt it. I doubt that anything is in there about the town parking lot.
It's something you could look, I mean, it is it's the center of the whole downtown.
But we also did a traffic study, and we did a lot a few years ago, for the traffic study, and I mean, there's enough data and enough studies and input that we have that we can start moving, we need the kick in the pants, you're absolutely right, I mean, this is what happens.
But even the T designed a different parking lot than what they did, and as the project went on, they started cutting back.
Well, PTSD,
We didn't get it.
we got a warrant to close.
So
So-
so my recommendation
Is
is
to
based on this
remove
is,
this.
you remove this article, move everything up by one, and then we start the process right now on the engineering assessment, and we tee up grant applications.
Sorry, forgive me, what article number was this?
It's
16,
Thank
this
you.
is the relocation to
Right,
Jamesburg
right,
at rear
right,
of
right,
45.
right, right.
It's just that it was asking for an easement.
And then hopefully we can come back as early as November with a very concrete proposal for town meeting to move the easements.
That would almost have to,
Yeah.
because then there's a season that, the work has to be done in a 3-month period in the summertime.
So we're, in this case though, we're just moving to take the article
Off the
Yes.
warrant, correct, okay.
Thank you.
I make a motion that we remove Article 16, relocation of James Brook at rear 45 South Main Street from the warrant.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay,
A minor thing, but when it comes back, it says James Brook, maybe make it James Brook Culvert.
Yes.
So people don't think we're changing the entire
Yeah,
road.
I think at that point there'd be a map and change.
Yeah, just call it culvert. so
As otherwise we're gonna be entertaining applications to change the rotation of the earth.
Yeah, exactly.
Only our piece, only our piece.
Thank you.
okay,
All right,
thanks
so,
Wayne.
You want to do a little, so, what you have in front of you now is a whole lot of material, that Don has circulated, including a cover memo, budget, and, there are there's four big budgets on the town side. Police, fire, public works, and IT. And IT actually has three faces. It has a school piece, a town piece, and then a central piece. Don has a cover memo which highlights the key adjustments in the overall budget. We met with advisory, just so you know, we met with them on multiple occasions. They focused on those four budgets this year, plus the 5-year forecast, which Don can also talk to you a little bit more in depth on. So you have the police presentation went to advisory. I for some reason, Chief Sylvia had this whole packet, but he doesn't seem to have it electronically, and he's still not back from vacation. So we have his expense and salary numbers, but not, all the other stuff he had. We have Ron's PowerPoints, which are in there, and then, the big things with Public Works are really the additions that went into the budget, money for rain gardens, money for painting and for facilities, money for, culvert maintenance, money for the Jamesbrook Tide Gate, things that had never been budgeted before, we actually now have lines items for. Now, Brian asked for more than we were able to fund, but for the very first time, they're identified specifically in the budget, which is a very important step. The other is that facilities, there's a few more, as part of this first step, with facilities, kind of bringing it above the line, at least on a rotational basis. We're going for the school committee to talk about more of the details of that in a couple of weeks. And, we put a little more money into the facilities budget for some extra overtime and also to allow for more management oversight if we're gonna give any of their managers more responsibility to work with the custodians to bring them more into the fold and link the units. We still have to talk through that, but there's funding available to start that process on the facility side. So do you want, I'm gonna just ask Don to, if you, to take the 5-year forecast maybe and have him walk through that with you, what pages is that on?
Yeah, I was gonna say, if you could identify the pages that,
Yeah.
that represent the numbers that are gonna go in the warrant for the community, which
So,
are probably
okay.
the 3-year,
Right.
4-year, 5-year.
In the warrant, that's gonna go in the warrant, we don't have that.
Oh, yeah, well, yeah,
Page 21,
yeah, that's going in the warrant, yeah. And you're gonna have a summary of the budget, which looks very much like page 16. 16, 17, and 18 are going to go into something very similar, that's going to the warrant as well. Well, actually, I should say it's really 13 through 18, because it's, the charts aren't going in typically, but the numbers are. And then the 5-year forecast is on 21, labeled 21.
Do we put the 5-year forecast in the actual?
Yep.
yep.
It's not adopted, it's as an informational piece in the warrant.
It's the appendix, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm gonna just step out of the room for 2 seconds, but start the conversation, and I'll be right back. Kevin, you're in charge.
This is also, the first 80 pages of the budget book are also in your hands, which is every town side department with a summary. What's in here is the FY18 actual, the FY19 budget, the FY20 recommended, and the full-time equivalents in every department. There's also the selectmen's budget message, my summary message, there's a lot of materials.
This is the annual budget book that's
Yes,
put together, right?
correct, this is the first piece of it. There's another 50, 60 pages, including glossaries, the capital budget and all that. So let me talk about process, then we'll pivot right back to this. So we met with advisory multiple times, we've gone through this in depth, and we also went through the final version of the 5-year forecast, which Don can talk about next. There's the advisory gave a unanimous recommendation to move forward. We can go into, we did talk about when we first talked about this back in January, we did an overview. We haven't been back to talk in any more depth. You can absorb this all tonight and over the next week and ask any more questions next week if anyone has any. And the budget book will be complete with the capital piece for next week too. So this will be the most comprehensive budget book we've ever done. We'll have the capital budget, the debt section, the glossary, school, sewer, water, and then the entire town piece. So
We have all of that now in this one?
that will be in one
And that
book.
includes the capital expenditures for all of them?
Yes, so that'll be up on the website for the town to look at well in advance of the actual town meeting.
So as I look at this document, am I to look at these as appendices?
Yes, those are, because those are the 4 biggest,
Right.
biggest budgets, and there's a little more deep dive into them.
Well, I would disagree on the IT side. So can I ask,
Sure.
for future, since I won't be here, the appendices just carry the same format? I understand that there's gonna be a desire for the department heads to do a narrative and so on. But ultimately, carry the same format in reporting the budget requests versus previous years, et cetera. Because what I see is, 4 different formats.
Yeah,
Right, I mean, the budget book is what we're presenting.
No,
and that's
no,
pretty
no,
much-
I understand that.
These were more,
Could
the
you,
departments themselves
Use
going
what's
to
standard.
advisory
Could-
here to.
could you guide the finance, the department heads to structure the financial reporting in commonality?
Sure.
Their own personalities may shine brilliantly through, the narrative.
Well, that's a very good point, because those will predated this book, right?
Right.
And now that we have a format, we should keep within some
Keep
of
with the format, you're going to have varying degrees of, capabilities on this board in the future, but you always have it at town meeting as well. And to the extent that anybody wants to dig into it, just making the formatting consistent makes it simpler and clearer for people to understand. I do have a specific question on this, and I don't wanna get into any great depth, I'd rather absorb it, but I just wanna understand the difference or the similarities between the Chief Technology Office and Town Technology.
So,
What page is that?
I'm sorry, 16. It's a line item about midway through the top section.
That's where Chris was previously mentioning how IT kind of has three pieces to the entire budget.
Okay.
So the Chief Technology Office is a central infrastructure budget where the CIO, deputy CIO, most of the payroll and hard infrastructure costs are out of the entire town, school and town side. And then the next line down is town technology, which is specific to just the town side technology, software costs, SoftWrite, any other permitting software we have.
Okay.
And then there's a school piece, which is in the school's budget.
Right.
That's related to.
So it doesn't show up here,
So
okay.
it doesn't show up here, it shows up in the total school budget.
So Town Technology is not actually just infrastructure, it's cost of operations.
Right, it's, we've now centralized, our internet, we've centralized our telephone, all of that's now in that
But
central budget.
that's also, that's also where you're pulling in personnel expense.
Well, at least 2.5 people, yes,
No, the personnel expense that is charged to the town.
yes.
Is there?
Thank you.
Because we don't have on the town side, that's really almost,
Halfway
that's
down.
almost entirely software-related costs and licensing costs.
Yeah.
And the schools have something similar on their side, and they also have a couple of bodies who do just school.
No, I'm looking to understand, any greater inquiry can come after we've had a chance to review the entire document.
And one of the things with that, and again, I could get you more details on the CTO side. We actually went into depth with advisory, because it's, we've been able to leverage the town's fiber loop, we've been able to centralize, reduce the expense and therefore centralize it. For example, all of our phone is now data. In fact, Ron's looking potentially to pivot it to one further step, and forgive me, I'm not gonna try to spit the initials out.
VoIP?
No, we are VoIP, but it would be to go from a PRI line to
SIP line,
a SIP
I think.
line, which
I don't
takes
know.
it one step further and is half the cost.
That's transfer internet protocol.
Yes.
Yeah, which means that calls disappear more cleanly.
They go into the ether.
Especially in my neighborhood.
what happened to you, Kevin?
Because it's becoming more and more data. So the good thing is that with our phones, you can now flip and move things a lot more easily, which is great. I conference called the other day with Diane. It was great. We were able to do a conference call. We couldn't do that a couple of years ago.
Conference call, people.
And
State of the
and by
art.
centralizing, we used to have 12 internet connections. We now have 2. We have a couple of firewalls instead of every
17,
site that's on right, which improves security and tightens out. They cost more because they're more robust. And then we've also, for the first time, moved the town's cellular phones into one coordinated bunch, which now Ron manages, which makes a lot of sense, which we track. And we're not there yet, but we're looking to potentially do that with the copiers, to put the copy machines on both school and town under one umbrella.
Be still my heart.
So imagine that, centralized management. So,
Wow.
we're not there yet. We have a little ways to go. But the cell phones, the fact that we've been able to do that, it's not like we've saved hundreds of thousands of dollars, but we've saved thousands of dollars, and it's much more efficient. We actually pay now nothing for the phones. We get, we're always like one generation behind, and so what? And we get money back every time we turn them back, which we weren't doing before. And we've been able to leverage just better savings, and it's a better run network.
We had a town full of burner phones.
A burner phone. Standard issue, we could use them ourselves.
Good one, Steve.
Bring the gasoline over here.
And one of the benefits of the town technology side is that a lot of that software used to be resident in people's individual budgets, which meant that people weren't always necessarily monitoring and managing. By the way, one classic conversation I had, this is my prior community, with a deputy town clerk. He was fighting me. I said, Jim, we have to move this into the central. No, I don't. You gotta tie it. You gotta pull that out of my clothed dead fingers. I'm like, it turns out there were 2 software generations and 3 behind. So, he never admitted that. But we moved it anyway. The clerk gave up, and we were fine. Because if you don't have somebody paying attention, It's not gonna, so that's their job, is to make sure we're on top of the software licenses. A few years ago, and this wasn't Bill's fault at all, the ICM, our police software was four generations behind. That was because of the technology support he wasn't getting. Now it's all done through the Shrek, so we've moved away from that entirely.
Well, the biggest concern on software, subscriptions and licenses is, once you get into aged areas, you lose the support, which then can open up security risks.
And that's one of the things he's doing too, by the way, is making sure that everything is tied into our security network properly and.
Just
Sure, you
FYI,
you wanna start, we can look at this.
down here in your spreadsheet.
Yep.
You've got an error showing up on WJC interface, last column.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yep. By the way, that's that William James College, that's that,
Oh, yes.
that program that wasn't, it was funded by the state, then it wasn't funded, we had to jump over emergency funding, then it was funded, and now it's not funded again, so that's why it's in there.
That's the same thing on the next page too, the bottom, 250.
Probably when they didn't have the zero
Yeah,
Yeah.
in front of
The
us.
state did give 2
the
additional
last two
years.
lines.
Yeah, the 250th and the 10th.
Yeah, that typically is gonna crop up if you've got a standard formula in comparing one cell to another and you've got a
Yeah.
blank.
You got it on page 18, the third line down, so.
Well, I mean, the key overall, I mean, the overall spending is going up about 3.5%. That's and some things are going up more and some are going down, believe it or not.
Are we thinking that this is the beginning of a trend, or is this a bump that handles specific needs?
Yeah, I think we've gone through a transition on technology. We've gone through a transition with HR. I think some of that has to kind of moderate a bit. I don't know that we can. We've modernized a lot of functions that had to be or created that had to be created. That said, and new growth has been really strong. That said, that's gonna have to cap at some point. We've
Is
had
that
some.
trend continuing this year, the new growth trend?
It seems, well, it seems to be.
So you seem to be keeping up?
I just don't know that it could be $800,000 on a regular basis.
Right,
I mean,
right.
it's like 2%.
I wouldn't budget for it.
No.
Yeah,
We
we're
did-
close to
we-
capacity,
yeah,
actually.
And didn't our accounting firm ask us not to put that in as a line item?
No, we should, no.
When we were doing the budgeting? Did they
Yes,
say
yes,
just- They
I
said
remember
zero
that.
budget on that.
Yes.
We have areas where we can grow.
I think that's for tax liens.
It's for yeah, we're not.
Oh,
we're not-
sorry,
yeah,
right,
we're not
taxes,
doing
I'm
tax
sorry,
liens.
yep.
The benefit area, the insurance, we've taken a really, we've worked real hard. This year we actually have a zero. We actually, our health insurance is actually going down a little bit for the first time. We're gonna level fund the healthcare budget though, because rates are only one part of it. The other part is people come on the plan and also change their plan. Since we have a fair number of younger staff, they tend to be a little bit more, they tend to flip to family plan. They start in individual plans, or they start with their parents, and then they pivot over at 26, and then new household formation tends to happen sometime in the late 20s, to
So
the
that
30s.
just coaches you, keeping
Yeah,
it
so it
level.
gives us a little cushion. Plus, what we've been doing is any net at the end goes into, we make a commitment to put that into OPEB.
Right.
As an item that arises under benefits, and I think you covered this before, but would you mind handling it again?
Sure.
We have a substantial drop in workers' comp on a budgeted basis. Can you talk about that?
The town was in a penalty for a number of years. There were a number of incidents, primarily on the school side, some folks who got hurt in some obscure ways, which raised our rates, and we ended up, because we're a fairly small provider at the end of the day, so we ended up in a penalty. We very aggressively the last few years worked to do education and to do safe practices, and as a result, our claims history, and it takes 2 years to lag out of that. So we finally hit the point this year where we fell out of the penalty,
So it's roll off.
we're not paying a penalty anymore, and we've had a really low claims rate the last few years, which is really good. So we actually benefited not only because we lost the penalty, but our experience rating has gotten much better.
Okay, and forgive me, one other item, here, just dropping down from there. Public roads repair comes out of the 20 budget, is that because it's gone elsewhere?
Yeah, it's going into the capital plan. So
Capital, okay, thank you.
so actually, that's a very big point to mention, if we're gonna look at on page 21 here on the capital budget plan.
Okay.
There are two new additions, in addition to the roll-off, we have been putting about $200,000 a year into roads, that's now going into the capital stabilization fund. In addition, because we were able to reverse the increase or stay in healthcare, we put another 200,000 into capital this year and going forward, because we've bent that curve. And that was identified as a primary area the town needed to put more resources. So that's getting us up to over $1.7 million going into the capital reserve this year, which is a new high in the budget. So, which now is allowing us to.
I just wanna point out that when we first, the stabilization fund was, the first deposit in that fund, I don't think was more than, it couldn't have been $300,000, and it was out of free cash. So, and for the $300,000, we had, I don't know, $1 million in
Requests.
And we didn't know what our cash budget, we didn't know what our cash account was. We had no cash account balance. We were kind of writing a check.
So to be at 1.7 million is, that's pretty impressive.
Count it.
And
To be
Know
able to
it.
account for it.
To be able to account for
Be
it.
fairly confident about these numbers.
On one set of books.
No PTSD, people.
Well, so, I mean, but the positive is that, look where we.
It's amazing.
You know, so.
It's not just the money, it's what it's done.
Right.
And that's just,
And when you pick up the conversation on capital next week, most likely, we're able to fully fund the plan this year. I mean, we had to adjust a few things, but and there's two things that will be bonded because they're big. So we're able to fully fund, and everyone's comfortable, by the way. Sam has met with Don incredulously a couple times to be sure that we actually have the money that we say we do. But it's been good. Now that.
And the deleveraging continues,
Now, I'm not suggesting the challenges have gone away. We know we have to, this building is a challenge. We know that, and again, by looking at a 10-year, very detailed look, we know there's significant investments in the schools and roofs and boilers. The fact is, we're planning for those things now, which is a very big difference, and we know they're coming, and we can look for grants. In fact, grants and partnerships, and so.
okay, so the one lesson from this is,
Long-range planning?
private sector calls it depreciation. The public sector doesn't have a term for it, but if we just use the concept,
Yep.
you look over the horizon and say, yep,
We need to,
we need to be accruing for that roof that needs to be replaced 20 years from now, et cetera.
Yep.
And stay ahead of the curve. You can still have surprises, but this is really impressive.
come a long way, baby.
Yeah.
So, and as you can see over the next couple of years, the debt roll-off will accelerate us up to $2.3 million.
Where, I'm sorry, now what page are you?
On 21, so if you look
Page
at,
21,
if you look at the out
transfer of other
years,
funds out.
Got it.
because of the debt roll-off
Stabilization.
accelerating, we're gonna get up to $2.3 million by 2022 in 2 years. And again, let's not mistake it, the demands are still significant. That said, there's resources there, and if we continue to put in money as a priority at the special town meetings with free cash, I think we figured another $500,000 or so, or $1 million over the next couple of years. The capital stabilization fund, it almost becomes, particularly with this 200,000 we actually put in, it's pretty much, it becomes near self-supporting. At least for the immediate term, because you have to keep reevaluating what you're doing, so.
Great.
And OPEB is next, we're not gonna talk about that tonight, but, there's an increase in that too. If you notice, we've gone up 50%, it's $50,000 from 100 to 150, with an understanding that we're gonna, again, prioritize that in the fall, and you're gonna be getting a report from the PEP committee in April anyway.
Yes, they're gonna come
That's
and
another
make some
step in
recommendations.
that direction.
What, is there any conversation that's taken place that you know of at the state level to address it?
None.
PEP?
Are they just doing the three monkeys?
No,
Yes.
they're putting money away. I mean, to
See no
the,
evil, hear no evil.
to the state's
No,
credit.
They've done a couple things. With the extra monies from capital gains, they typically will put that into the OPEB.
There's no plan, though.
That's
There's absolutely no plan.
typical yearly, they'll do that, so each year if there's additional, typically it's capital gains, long and short term, from that would go into the OPEB.
You
But that's
mean
only
similar
for
to-
the state
State.
generally.
Similar
They-
to pensions, is that what you're looking
No,
at?
Well,
OPEB in general.
OPEB generally, it just, the question is really whether or not there's any legislative initiative to
None.
uniformly address the issue such that it would be something that would be applicable for cities and towns to
So the
address.
governor came in front of the MMA legislative committee that I sit on, and they said they have zero plans. It's a $360 billion liability, and they have no plan to address it.
It's
And that's
fourth-
the state.
That's the state.
But they're
That's
not
the state dealing with, no, that's the
Right.
aggregated
of
liability
the
for the,
communities.
yeah,
But the state's own liability is the
Correct.
fourth largest in the nation.
yes.
Yep.
And they have no plan for
Now,
that.
as Diane knows from serving on the Maya Trust, Maya's done its own analysis and recognizes that it's literally unsustainable. If the curve isn't bent, it is simply not sustainable, because you'd spend all your money in healthcare, and you can't possibly do that.
MMA, socialized some legislation a year and a half ago, and it started, and, everybody was like, oh, let me hear about it, and then guess what?
John said that.
Guess what happens every 2 years? It's an election, and they're like, nobody is gonna say, well, we need to take, we need to set a state contribution level,
I'll lose
at
votes.
50-50 or whatever, like, it's just,
In the big towns like New Bedford and Springfield, they're all in this committee, and they're completely, they don't know what to do.
Now, again, I don't wanna, we'll talk about this at length, but the PEP,
Yeah.
I think there's a real plan for PEP that's very, that I think will address the towns. I think the PEP committee's done a lot of tremendous work, and I think you'll be excited to hear the work they've done and that Don has done with them. And I think we have an answer that will, I think, work.
Yeah, the reason I asked the question is really just to flesh out, I think, for all of us to recognize that we're probably left to figuring this out on our own.
Yep. At least from a funding perspective. Now, from a healthcare perspective, costs can't accelerate forever. Now, the good news is that because Maya is the largest Blue Cross Blue Shield.
You're right. An outbreak of bird flu might take care of some of that.
every time we bring this up, this guy.
Measles,
What, you saw that, right? Rockland County? 151 cases of measles.
Okay, moving
So-
right along, we
so-
got over undergoing.
Maya,
We got over under, and I'm
Let's
looking
go.
good, so let's get on it.
Maya is the largest Blue Cross Blue Shield partner in the state of Massachusetts. As a result, they've been able to leverage a lot, which is one of the reasons our healthcare rates fell this year. Partly because we've done a tremendous amount on the wellness side, but Maya has really worked incredibly closely. They've done a lot of rollouts. In fact, our employees will be able to get the benefit of, you get a list of MRIs. You go to the less expensive MRI, you're gonna get a check. Because it's gonna cost everybody less, and it's MRIs and MRIs and MRIs.
Right, other people thinking about stuff.
And they're doing, there's gonna be a whole other musculoskeletal program that's like avoid surgery and do other positive things, and so
I think that is
That
really...
is literally the number one cost driver,
What?
musculoskeletal.
Yeah.
The,
Well, it's,
the new knees, the shoulders, the
well,
elbows.
yeah, back
the-
injuries.
That is number one, diabetes is number two.
I just think it's absolutely fascinating that this is coming out of Maya. And, my own insurance in the private sector does nothing to enforce something similar.
in this case, governments are, we can't raise, you can't raise taxes, we have caps, right? So, now, I gotta tell you, Prop 2.5 has become a mother invention in a lot of ways, cause you have to find creative ways of approaching it. So- Well, not always.
Realistically, it's a ratchet.
Yeah,
So,
but ratchets sometimes are effective,
Right.
so,
but they never go down.
Maya's not in business to make money
No,
either,
right.
so that kinda helps.
it's one of those things where government has actually worked effectively.
So Don's we're gonna get a chance to review the budget.
Yeah,
and
so you
Don's
could, you
gonna
could
come
spend the
back.
next
Okay.
week chewing out all of these documents. Is there anything, do you wanna go over right now?
Well, when are we voting on this, next meeting?
Next meeting.
No.
The advisor's already voted.
No,
on
and
it.
let's, if
they've
you don't mind,
approved this?
give us some time to digest
Sure,
it.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Do you wanna go over anything
we'll do
right now?
recommendations on the budget will be done next week,
Okay.
okay? Just to give us all time to process and come up with any last
I
minute
can give you
questions.
this all electronically too, but you now have the entire first section, the first 80 pages of this document,
Yep.
which is all of the town side budget.
So would you shoot it electronically to
Yeah,
us?
we can send this all.
And also, the, advisory did vote to recommend this.
Yes, they
Do
voted
you have a vote?
unanimously,
Okay.
6-0.
Okay,
I ask you something, do you get any alligator clips around here?
yeah. I was
Yeah, I'll
just
get you one the
thinking
other
something.
night. I'll get you something. We have them kicking around.
Okay,
All right, so let's go through the rest of the articles. You can start voting on some of the other ones.
Yep.
So the unpaid bill of prior years, we talked about. I'm afraid there's one. You wanna? I'll turn this over to you. You can start.
Just
Oh, thanks, bud.
$71.67.
Okay.
for the DPW department, just,
Do we need to
Did
take action on this? Do we need to vote on
make a
this?
recommendation?
I think we
Yeah,
need a
let's vote.
subcommittee to see
Yeah,
what
yeah,
that,
no, I think we're
investigate
okay.
that.
Move,
I'll pay for it.
move that, we recommend Article 4, at town meeting, so long as it never arises again.
Second.
Sorry, can you just clarify what the article is, just in
Sorry.
case the numbers
Move,
change?
move that we recommend Article 4, unpaid bills, to town meeting.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Article 5 of the supplemental appropriation, there's only one. Advisory voted in favor of this 6-0, and Ned, you wanna talk about this one?
Sure, we talked briefly about it last time I attended the meeting. This is essentially relating to the grinder pump retrofit.
Placements,
It's the acceleration, right?
Acceleration of the replacement, so initially it was thought to be over 5 years, the contract was really over 3 years, so this is accelerating the remaining retrofits that are due under contract.
Okay.
And
Chris-
the money's coming from the sewer debt stabilization fund, which has been approved by the sewer commission.
Okay, they did take a position on this?
From my understanding, I haven't looked at the minutes.
Right.
From my understanding, they did.
That's where the money's coming from.
They're
The money's coming from.
proponents of this, and
Yeah.
that's,
Yeah.
that would, okay.
Right, I just wanna make sure that the
Yes.
paper is
Yes, so
is
no,
set
the
properly.
advisory voted 6-0 to
Good,
recommend.
thank you. Chris?
Move that we recommend Article 5, supplemental appropriations for fiscal year 19.
Second.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Stabilization funds, you wanna just walk these real quick? Let me ask you, does anyone have any questions on these? We talked about them
No, we
last
did
week.
look at them. Now, what about
I
water?
I don't believe, so we're not gonna know this for sure till tomorrow, because water board meets tomorrow, we kinda, go over a couple of things.
Yeah, it's gonna be between basically the water meeting and then finally capital, I believe,
On
depending on
Monday.
what is
Okay.
approved
So
for
we'll
the
just-
So
project.
they'll kinda do one of two things, they're either gonna put money into their capital stabilization, or just put the money that was going to capital station directly into articles to pay for debt.
So it's not ready to be recommended?
No, but so advisory voted the first 4, cause those are ready to go, but you don't have to.
No, we just.
Yep, we'll just do it all next
That's
week.
fine. You're gonna finish 7 next week, but as you see, that the vast majority of these are done.
Are we gonna have a number for the town roof, or are we
No,
gonna
the-
put in 200,000 and you're comfortable with it, and then?
The bids are out or going out, we'll have them back, Jason just told me today, the 2nd or 3rd week in April, so we'll have them before town meeting, we'll have them in.
So we'll put them up.
Yeah, so that'll probably have, that's the one, you may have to just hold that one item, but I would recommend everything else get voted, because we'll be done with it.
And we'll hear from advisory on the roof before we vote, right?
Yeah, the only reason they held is because capital hadn't finished.
Okay,
Okay.
Just as long
great.
as.
Department
We've already done that.
department
It's already-
revolving
it's all
fund?
done.
Oh, we
Eight
did that,
is
sorry,
done.
thank you.
9.
Allocation for one-time
Okay,
costs.
so these have changed a little bit. There's 6 projects now. The school traffic study, I think we've talked about, that's to do an analysis of the challenges at both the elementary schools and also the middle high school. One member of the advisory committee did not think that was worth it. People should just find ways of getting to school more effectively, but everyone else supported that one.
Don't necessarily disagree with that,
No,
but
I understand, but it is what it is.
What, one child, one car is not good enough?
somebody who
Yeah.
dropped off and picked up every day, yeah.
It's a special community.
I get it, we're all special,
The
got
town,
it.
the town needs.
Moving right along,
Project 2, there's a new general stormwater permit, which is NPDES.
Yep.
We need to
Support.
update that permit, at the local level, and the estimate is about $62,000 to get a consultant to come in and do that work. Pay equity, I think we talked about that, right? We just need to be able to get that study done.
Excuse me, I just sorry,
Sure.
I know we're trying to move
No,
along,
ask.
but what are we spending $62,000 to,
So
the stormwater permit?
The terms, the permit has totally changed, so that the reporting is different, the materials are all different. It's not just updating what you've already done, you kind of have to do like a restudy of everything and give new materials. I can have Brian Joyce explain in more detail
What is it, we have to report our stormwater activity to the state?
Yes.
And this is gonna cost us $62,000?
To get the new baseline, because the permit requirements have totally changed at the federal level, and now we have to revamp how we report.
So why don't they pay for it?
I would agree with it, that would be nice, but the
Unfunded
federal government
mandates.
is not, it's not the state, by the way, this is a federal
Federal.
permit.
Federal.
It's a federal stormwater.
good luck there, Kevin.
Yeah.
Good talk to him.
Yeah, I know, it's a lot of money, it's,
Give me the carrier there.
pay equity, any question on the pay equity
Nope.
study? So
I'm not
drainage
gonna
and
pay
water
that.
management, we talked about culverts and, you know, Treats Pond and a few things, so, we came up with a number of 17.5, which will allow us to do, I think it's 5 culverts and some, potential aeration at a pond or two if we need to.
Great.
And it's kind of a supplement to what the, you know, these are all sub-capital, none of them are big enough to be capital projects. The 250th we talked about, that's the money that they've asked for, and again, we won't spend any of it. Without, you know, going through, having them have a budget and all of you being in favor of it. And then the last number,
That's additional to the
we-
50 that's already been in there.
yeah, there's already 50 in there, so this will bring the total town contribution to 100, none of which has been spent. The next one, we still have a couple of open contracts, and including the police, which is pushing up against the edge. This is just allowing us a little flexibility to make sure we can plug the budget without causing a problem.
Okay.
And then that, whatever's not spent at the end, it just
Goes
resolves
back
to
to the
free
general
cash. Yeah. So.
Okay, would anybody like to make any motions on this?
Make a motion, we recommend Article 9 and approve allocation of funds for one-time costs.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
You've already voted Article 10.
11, you mean?
You've already voted, no, Article 10, you
10,
voted,
yeah, yeah.
and 11. 12 you have not yet voted. This is the state allows you to raise the threshold for, the personal property taxes up to, no, you can't get it any lower, any higher than 10, the minimum can't be more than 10. The assessors wanna make it 5, which they're allowed to do, which will eliminate 87 accounts that only generate a combined total of $2,900, and someone did the math, and it's $45 an account or something like that, I forget what Rob Hellman did the math, so
Yeah.
it's not remotely worth the effort they take, or the hassle to the people who have to be assessed.
Okay,
Move that we recommend Article 12 to town meeting.
Is there a second?
Increased threshold for personal property taxation.
Second.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so, this is now clean, it's community, so CPC has now voted its allocations, those are statutory requirements, the first 4. They voted 5, 6, and 7, which is I think you all heard those in the joint meeting, so, CPC's voted all of them. Advisory, voted, actually, you know, they haven't voted this yet.
I think they were waiting for Russ to attend the next meeting.
No, they voted 7, they voted 5, I'm sorry, they voted 6 and 7. This is not correct, they voted 6 and 7, but the pool, they've held the pool.
Okay.
Yeah, so let's move along.
So
Do you want to just wait for this for next
we'll
week?
wait and we'll
Okay.
do this entire article as one.
You've already voted 14?
Yep.
15 is just on unfortunate, we have to raise the fines to comply with state law, so, the advisories recommend this by a vote of 6 to 0.
Okay,
Make a motion, we recommend the town meeting for Article 15 update the animal control funds to comply with state law.
Second.
all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Okay, so, and we
Table.
voted to
So
get rid
16's
of
off, so we're gonna
Article
change all the
16.
articles going forward. So on Article 16, we're having a very intense conversation with council to ensure that this article really does set up a 2-stage process where you study first and then vote later to implement a plan, should everyone like the plan. And that's what advisory voted in favor of, by the way, when they voted 7 to 0, they voted in favor of a 2-step process. Diana and I had a very long conversation with Paul DeRensis, which,
That's redundant.
yes, it is, so, we're
Yes,
still.
yes, it was.
It was very redundant, so we're trying to get a clean answer as to whether or not a simple motion fixes this or what. So,
He's working on it?
yes,
Yeah, we're, Chris and I
In the
have,
process.
we spent a lot of time not getting back.
Right, so
so-
we're on this to make sure it's clean and it gets us what we think we want.
To study first, and then,
later.
yeah, spend
Right.
later, Measure once, measure twice, cut once.
Thank you.
So
Alright.
there are gonna be some deep thoughts on this, and we're gonna
Yes,
get
we
an
can-
answer.
Yeah,
cut
we'll
twice
talk
and
about
then-
it, something like that, right.
Alright, let's go.
Not good if you're not.
We'll talk about that. So, the new Article 17, rescind voluntary checkoff.
So,
Good night.
Good night, John.
so back in,
Done.
back in the year 2000, the town voted to put in 3 different checkoffs. There's elderly and disabled tax fund, a scholarship fund, and general report for education. For somewhere along the way, the town forgot it did it. Don't ask me why. Paula found that we indeed had in their bank in place. The schools are content, they have no problem keeping it. The Board of Elder Affairs thinks that it's redundant. I don't wanna speak for them, but they're not supportive of, they think that it doesn't generate enough money for the hassle, and how do you pick anybody? There is, by the way, a statutory committee that the selectmen have to create, but they've recommended it be rescinded. So advisory said fine. Elder Affairs Board, I'm still waiting to find out what their actual vote was, but they've been pushing me to do this, so it's pushing me to encourage you to do this. So, I don't know if you wanna hear from them directly before you take a position, or.
I make a motion, we recommend town meeting floor, Article 17 rescind, voluntary checkoff of elderly tax abatement.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye, sorry.
The new Article 18 is, we have to vote to place this on the warrant, and then we will, discuss a recommendation after we hear from advisory next week.
And I would recommend you at least vote to put it on the warrant, and then
Yes.
we'll go from there.
Make a motion, we place Article 18, Harbor Village Business HPV Overlay District on the warrant.
Is there a second?
Yeah, I'll second it, and then a question, this is what we have before us here is exactly what we just reviewed.
The language is, this is at a slightly different, it's a little different than what Pete handed out, because we're trying to get it clean. So, what will be in here is it will be the final language that council's vetted and everyone's vetted, so.
This
Is there
language-
anything substantively changed?
No, it's
You're
just,
talking about
it's all just,
references and
yes,
chapters
yes.
and,
It's all lawyer
cause some of the
orders.
but nothing substantive to what we have before us, right?
there's no substantive difference, it's just the technical edits that are.
Yeah. And this is the one we'll be voting on, after we've gotten input from
Yes.
advisory, is
Yes,
that what
and
it
you
was?
will have before the meeting a clean version of the actual language.
Exactly what's going on.
And whatever changed.
And it'll
So
be in,
yes,
it'll be in the
it'll be in the
warrant.
warrant.
And
So we
in the
have-
future, we'll vote on the recommendation.
Correct. We have a first and a second to place Article 18 Harbor Village Overlay District on the warrant. Is there a second?
Second.
Sorry, I need a motion.
You got it.
Oh, we got it.
Got a
Okay,
motion.
sorry.
You
Oh,
did
it's
vote.
getting late. Okay. We have everybody. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, it's on the warrant.
5-0.
And then 9.
Well, these are, the next are all citizens petitions, so.
Okay.
So 19, the which is the sewer district amount,
This
the proponent has withdrawn.
indefinitely postponed.
So I'm gonna recommend you vote to recommend indefinite postponement.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
And, just for those listening, this will, because it's a citizen's petition, it will appear on the warrant. Get emailed.
So
What
article,
will appear?
This article.
this article 19 will still appear because the citizen petition can't go away.
Yeah.
But the recommendation is to definitely postpone it because the proponent of it has said, we're not gonna go forward.
So they have to get up on town floor and withdraw it? or-
Yeah, well,
Yes.
Dan already has the letter, he can just read it and, you know, we're good.
Okay, the next one,
Is new Article 20, this is the conservation restriction proposal for Beach Street. I am recommending in my town manager update that, and I'll bring it up now only because it's relevant to this question, that because all of you have raised this, and advisory also raised it adamantly at its last meeting, that the town needs to have a policy for the disposition of town-owned land.
Who said that?
Well, you said it.
we've all
and-
said it.
And I circulated in the packet, some draft policy from the towns. What I'm gonna recommend you do, is charge me to get a draft policy to all of you to consider and vote on in the next couple of months, and in the interim, put a freeze on any kind of disposition.
Can I make it, can I add to that for the board's consideration? Before this board breaks up, having been the identifying party of this, the board that is, that we simply draft our thoughts with respect to objectives that we want to accomplish with this policy, okay? And.
Go for it, big guy.
No.
No, I think
no.
we have some good examples in our packet from other communities.
Here's an example of what I'm thinking about, because you've got, we've got conflicting objectives, right? We wanna preserve the town, but at the same time, just based on a financial equation, we have to consider what that means with respect to
Making things
income.
up more.
Interestingly enough, the more you preserve, the more exclusive this town becomes, because the land becomes extensively more valuable. So the two are in conflict, and ultimately that policy has to recognize that. and we have to identify the objectives that we expect the policy to execute. The policy itself is the mechanism, right? And so before Chris can go off and do that, or come back to us with recommendations, I think it's incumbent upon us to think long and hard, to identify what are the, 2 or 3 key things that we want that policy to achieve. That's it, that's my suggestion.
So I would recommend that each individual selectman do that, send it to Tracy. This is something, there's other 2 other quick policies that I would like to do while this board is still, in play, because I value
Excuse me,
both of
we're
your
not in play,
experience.
we're intact.
Intact.
Minor thing, I mean.
Good point, touche. Anyway, but yes, let's send any thoughts you have on this. I think we need to define disposition of land, and do we include acquisition of land in the same policy?
That's a really good question, that needs to be talked about.
So, it's just something for everybody to think about. Send some thoughts to Chris through Tracy, please, right, Tracy?
Yes.
And then we'll queue this up as soon as we can.
Yeah.
Could I ask that all the selectmen share with the other selectmen too, so we can
Yeah.
work off each other's ideas?
If you send it in to Tracy, we'll distribute to everybody, so you
Okay.
can see.
Well,
I mean,
just because of open meeting law, I shouldn't share my ideas so you can work with my ideas and come up with your ideas. I think we
Right,
need to
yeah.
just throw it all out
Yeah.
there, then Tracy can share all of them.
Yeah.
And then we can use those to
if
craft
we get it back
some objectives.
this next week, we could distribute it at the next meeting, so you can all have it, and you can come back, and that way we can keep it active, because we're meeting for the next couple of weeks anyway,
Okay.
so we'll keep
Okay.
the dialogue going.
And
right?
then the other nuance to what you just said was whether we wanna consider putting in some kind of a freeze on disposition of land, which would mean, we're the ultimate brokers, so,
Well, I think
we
without,
can do that with,
without a policy, we're setting ourselves up and the future of the community for problems,
and I
right?
think we all agree with
At
that,
the-
yeah.
And so I think it makes sense that in the absence of a policy, we should refrain from, what's the word I'm looking for?
Taking action
From
on-
any action,
yeah.
taking any action on a resource so valuable as land that the town owns or would like to own, other
Do you-
than the parcel we just bought.
And the
Do you wanna
advisory
craft a
committee-
motion?
The advisory
That's what
committee
we
said, the advisory committee said the same thing, by the
Yeah.
way. They didn't vote that way, but that's what they.
know that,
Alright, so let's
Do
just.
you wanna take a motion on that, Chris?
Go ahead.
What's
Yeah.
your name?
Selectman Gomer?
Mr. Gomer?
Well, wait a minute, first of
Under
all.
2 minutes, my friend, under
Hold
2
on.
minutes.
So are you looking to make a motion on this particular article?
No.
First.
On
Freezing,
freezing
disposition,
or
or
some kind
acquisition.
of
Why don't we do that
no
next week
action.
after we reflect on what we're
Okay.
doing?
That's a good idea.
This is
Okay.
coming at us a
Nothing's
little
gonna
quick.
happen
That's
between
a
this
good
week and
idea.
next
Okay,
anyway,
alright,
so let's go
alright, so
ahead.
we'll take no action on this article, or do you wanna make a recommendation on the article?
I frankly, I recommend that we, I'm sorry, move that we recommend against this
Why don't
article.
we wait till we see what advisory
Yeah,
votes and gives us
It's
that?
a quick vote.
What,
Oh, I'm
didn't
sorry,
didn't
I'm
it
sorry.
So we
already
can
vote?
reflect on this
I apologize,
next
I didn't
week.
realize that
Voted.
advisory had
Oh, I'm
voted.
sorry, I misunderstood
So let's
that
get
too.
their
I
advisement,
haven't
we
voted.
have some time to look at this,
They-
cause
they-
these
they-
are new
but they
issues
had-
coming up.
Yeah.
They raised the same
21?
issue about creating a policy, so what I expect them to tell me on Thursday
but
is that
just
they're
have
gonna
them-
come up with they're gonna recommend a policy be drafted before anyone votes on it.
Great.
Good.
Yeah.
Actually, have them give us one, give us a suggested policy.
I don't
No,
think.
that's not their
They're gonna have
job.
one on Thursday.
No. Okay,
Alright,
so,
so- Alright, tomorrow,
this,
so the water board, the water commission meets tomorrow,
Okay.
and they will formally vote. So I'll have a document in hand that says this
this
easement's
is okay,
good to go,
Okay.
and we're fine.
alright, so we can't take action on
Right.
that. Electrical aggregation, we're gonna hold off on that, so we're,
Now, there's one that's not on here that came off, okay? So I had a call with Rich Henderson today, a very plaintive call, and he said, Chris, I really wanna get this thing straightened out to Smith Place, I promise, I'll come in tomorrow, you'll have a new easement, you'll have everything else, can you please work with me to get this done? And I said, I will talk to the selectmen, I said, you're at the 11th and a half hour, I said, we don't, and again, we all know that the problem is literally that we know that the easement's in one place and the culvert's in another, so it has to be fixed. If Rich actually brings in a clean set of documents, which I'll give to Paul Durensis to write an article about, I told him it's past the 11th hour at this point. do you want me to just tell them, I'm sorry, we can do it in the fall, or?
Well, my first reaction, I don't even know in the content, is I'm very dubious about us doing these things really quickly. A few weeks before meetings, this never
Sure,
has.
it's such a
I
narrow-
said
And
I
it's
would bring it
also
up.
not, it's also not a good way to make public policy and explain our good governance to the people.
So, I just
So
wanna
I say bring it back in the fall.
yeah, I totally agree, I just wanna confirm, because we have discussed it,
We have, but I took it off because we haven't had.
but we
any
haven't voted
information.
it on, is
Nope,
that correct?
haven't
Okay.
been voted on.
Alright, we're not taking action.
Okay, and I
I'm
will,
in agreement.
I will pass
Advise
along
them
the.
so,
re-
yes, yeah, thank you.
Okay, it's
Okay.
fine.
Alright, so we're in relatively good shape,
Yeah.
next meeting is it. And then
That's
this
the
is
goal.
going to the printer, so.
The only piece of information you will not have is the bid price on the
On
town
the
hall roof.
town hall
That's-
roof.
That's it.
Yep,
So we're gonna have that vote in the morning.
floor,
time,
yeah.
so-
Or you might have it the week before, you might have it on the 23rd for your meeting before the.
So we could vote on it.
Yeah.
if we wanna.
I hope. Okay,
Okay.
it's the warrant.
excellent. Next up is the ratification of the police contract. Would anybody like to move?
Move.
We did see that.
Yeah, move that we ratify the newly presented.
So, next week, can I ask a clarifying question, please?
Can I
So
do
next
my
week on
motion?
the second, we're gonna do the final warrant, is that,
Yes,
so
correct.
we'll be done and put away?
That's
Yes.
the plan,
It'll go to printer,
and it goes to the print.
that's the technical term.
To the printer. The printer.
Okay, so
Selectman
ratification,
Gomer?
please kind of,
Get off your phone, and since you had to interrupt me,
No,
you
I
make
was
the
looking at my
motion.
calendar, no, I
You
don't
make
want,
the
I want
motion.
you to, you do a much better job.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
because you couldn't wait
You're the
for it.
best, you're the best.
Move that we ratify the police
Boys.
contract as presented to us this evening in
Is there a
executive
second?
session.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Congratulations, Chris, good work
and
on
we'll
that.
pass that along to, I'm very
Um,
happy police chief.
Town manager update?
So, what we were just talking about, so you're all gonna get comments back to Tracy, we'll have this on the next couple of agendas just for conversation, okay?
All right.
Other than that, everything has really been consumed by the warrant. The Health and Rec Fair went great, thank
Sure
you
did.
for coming and taking part. I think it was an all-time record for participating organizations. And it was a great crowd, I came up, for a bit and got my cholesterol checked.
How is it?
A couple of things, it was good, my cholesterol's good.
Good.
My HDL's a little low, so I gotta work on that, so, it's not so much fish oil you can have.
Welcome to America.
Exactly, without,
So I gotta walk in more, I think, so,
Yeah.
or something, so.
that's good.
But otherwise, I'm good, so, but it was good, a good crowd, they were doing Reiki, I didn't do that.
I think we
Reiki,
did
yeah.
Reiki, and
Wow.
blood pressure, and popcorn, and.
Goes from
You
Reiki.
do
Has to help
Reiki,
you with
you
your
get
cholesterol.
popcorn.
Exactly, so,
Sounds good.
and,
Yoga and Girl Scout cookies. Nothing
what
wrong.
else, I guess, the angst show is going on right now.
Right now, I know,
So
sorry
hopefully
to
that was a
miss
good
that.
program up at the high school tonight, I'm expecting they had a good crowd for that, so. The Safe Harbor, has been renewed for another cycle, we know that, so that's good, we're in the third year of that program, so.
Wow, what's the likely extension of that?
Well, they have to start coming with a plan, to make them permanent, they have to come up with a funding plan, they can ask for another 5-year extension, provided there's money in the budget to do it,
Right, and that's
Um,
federal money.
it's federal money, so.
Okay.
But that's still 2 more
Alright, we
years.
can talk about that,
Yeah,
yeah.
another future meeting, that's what I got.
Terrific, okay, selectmen update, Kevin,
Set.
Paul,
There's I believe the road race is
Sunday.
Sunday,
on the list.
so definitely, come down, run, help out, volunteer, go to Dooley's. do-
I volunteered to pick up the bagels,
There you go.
and I'm gonna be at the traffic stop at Ripley and Main Street if you wanna look for me.
And the other thing, there's a Dana-Farber Cancer fundraiser at Friday night, April 5th for South Shore Hospital. Everyone's invited, it's a casino night, and it's at the Red Lion, and will involve basically monies for Dana-Farber and South Shore Hospital.
It's Friday night, you said?
Friday night.
Ju-
All on red.
I just wanna add a couple little details to the road race, it begins at 1 p.m. There are intermittent road closures between 12:50 and about 2:15, along the route, which is starting at the community center, and then they go down Elm Street, down Atlantic, all the way down to Jerusalem and up Forest and back down North Main Street, so there will be intermittent, there's gonna be a, robocall from the police department reminding people of road closures, and there are gonna be moments where people will not be able to be on the road. So, people, especially in the cul-de-sacs where they don't see it so much, need to understand that, there are gonna be some road delays.
The weather's supposed to look good though, so
And
it's
the weather
supposed to be
looks,
fifties.
it's supposed to be a really nice weekend, so, Jack,
I'm good.
you're good? Steve?
I actually have, please give me 3 or 4 minutes. First of all, as I'm nearing the end of my term, I really wanna thank each and every one of you. We've had knockdown, drag-out fights. We've had moments of agreement. We've had discussions in between, and yet for all of that, I've never lost respect for either of you, any of you, at any time. in either of you.
He's got two of us.
He was looking at Paul and I when he said that.
Whoa, baby.
So-
What a way to go out. What a way to go out. Oh, boy.
I've been known to misspeak on a
Oh,
regular basis.
yeah.
I've never lost respect for any
No.
of you, and I would like to think that I've managed to hold my own with you. And I bring this up because it's the very nature of working with and amongst the board. Each of us were elected by the town as a whole, and so by definition, each of us were elected for not only who we were, but what we promised. And that makes your opinions of equal weight to each of us, and likewise in reverse. That's very important because it comes back to the idea of respect. I say this now to the citizens of Cohasset. You're coming up on a vote for 2 positions in Selectmen, and so you're going to be voting for each of them. And if I may offer my suggestions, they are as follows.
General.
Vote for someone who offers solutions, ideas, positive thoughts, not one who tears down the personalities of others who have given their time with unwarranted and unfounded attacks. And for no particular reason. It doesn't make any sense to me. And ask about those. Why would you do it? Because I would argue that if a person is promoting such thoughts, they're not going to present you with positive ideas about your town and about how to make positive improvements in it. I find it disturbing, actually disgusting, because I've heard of these and then had them substantiated twice. And by the way, they're not about me. They're about colleagues that I've served with, and it drives me absolutely nutty. The second piece of that is that one of the candidates is promoting that there is every reason to come in and fix Town Hall because of the outrageous problems that exist here. And I would argue that each of you have had long tenures, not only in this position, but in others around town. And I would argue that we have had problems, and we've made tremendous progress, and any community will have them. But to promote that this town has fatal flaws that cannot be survived without one superhuman effort is a thought you might want to question. It takes an awful lot of people to make this town tick, and it's not just the 5 people that sit at this table at any one time. It's not just the town manager. It's all of the 300 plus committee members. It's the staff like Jen, who's now here at 10 o'clock.
That's Tracy.
That's Tracy.
I'm sorry, Tracy, whoever you are. Tracy, by the way, Tracy, who is always here late with us, and Jen when Tracy's not here. I thank you for your time. I thank you for your consideration. I thank you for the honor of having been able to serve the community. But mostly, if there's a legacy that any of us would leave, it's that you cast your votes for people who bring something positive to the table. Thank you for listening, and thank you for each of you listening and putting up with this. It's now 10 o'clock. Diane's got the over-under if I shut up now.
Okay. Right. So we have 2 sets of minutes, minutes from February 12th and February 26th. Is there a motion to approve both?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
I have no topics not reasonably anticipated. Again, we meet next week. Send Chris your ideas on the disposition of town land, and I will call for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Now, who won the, let me see.
That was me.